What is it like to have children you don't want? I can tell you what it's like being the unwanted child. I went to the dentist once in my first 17 years. I'd broken my nose twice and I just had to walk it off. I never saw a doctor. I would get yelled at if my shoes wore out too quick and they were Payless 1999 shoes. As soon as I was able to drive, the dinner table was only set for 2 instead of 3 because I could get my own food now. My lunch was a bologna white bread sandwich and an apple for 10 years straight. Fast forward, I moved in with my grandma. She said she would help out with college if I helped out around the house. First few months she got me in the dentist, fixed all my teeth, and I got some braces on. Second, I was a mouth breather, so I went to a plastic surgeon and fixed my deviated septum right up. She also co-signed on a car loan so I could get around. She embraced every friend that came to the house while growing up. My friends hid from my dad because he was so mean. My grandma noticed that I would get home and run to my room, and one day she told me, I don't have to hide in there. I can hang out wherever I want. That's the difference between being a burden and being wanted. I have a feeling a few of these stories are going to be really sad, so 1, buckle up, but 2, let's appreciate a good heartwarming end. Thank you to the loving grandmas. Story 2. Using an alt because my main can be linked back to me and I'm going to get very real. I had a perfect pregnancy. I was super cautious, took my prenatal vitamin every day, never drank, walked away if someone was smoking near me, etc. My child is severely special needs. She's autistic, but on the severe end with global developmental delay, which is just a nice way of saying mentally disabled. She is 6, but is now just learning to potty train. She is nonverbal, but thankfully understands simple directions. She screams for hours off and on at times every day, and when she isn't screaming, she is making noise. She doesn't interact like a normal child and treats other people more like inanimate objects rather than people. No affection, no emotion, no interaction aside from pulling me to the fridge to get her food or handing me her toy so I can fix something on it. I don't feel like a mom. I feel like a caregiver. I get little joy in taking care of her and I am constantly worn down. I'm exhausted. This pandemic has destroyed what little sanity I had left as I can't even get a small break because there is no school. This is going to sound absolutely terrible, and this is why I'm using an alt. But raising her is not like raising a child. You raise a child to be a decent adult, to teach them manners, respect, education, and kindness, and you hope that as they grow up, they will make friends, get good grades in school, and go on to have a fulfilling life. This feels like I am raising a very high-maintenance pet that will not evolve into anything more. For me, I'm just keeping her alive. I'm keeping her fed, clothed, warm, safe, and happy. It feels like I've been taking care of a baby for the past 6 years. She progresses very slowly and very little. I am hoping by the time she is in her 20s, we can maybe have a simple 1 or 2 sentence conversation, or maybe she can even have the attention span to watch and understand a movie. I still talk to her and play with her, but it's so discouraging after years of not getting anything back. I mainly just snuggle with her on the couch while she plays with her tablet. It is one of the few ways we really bond. She likes toys and simple games on her tablet, so I buy her lots of them to keep her busy and hope that they keep her content so she isn't screaming and hitting herself. I see children much younger than her having full conversations with their parents and I get so jealous. I see them telling their parents they want burgers for lunch or talking about a fun thing they want to do or whatever. I can't even imagine how easy my life would be if she could just communicate simple things like that. It's so tough. I take her to the playground and other kids ask why she won't talk or play with them. Pre-COVID days. We go out to the grocery store and she has a full meltdown and we have to leave our cart behind. We go out to eat and she can't sit still and wants to get up and run around the restaurant, so we have to leave. She's only getting bigger and taller and she's getting harder to manage. She hits herself and others. Sometimes she smears poop all over the walls. She slams her head into the wall and furniture when she's frustrated, which is often, like multiple times a day. She broke a window with her head a few weeks ago and I was scared crapless she was going to need stitches. But luckily she somehow came out unharmed aside from a bruised forehead. I don't know how I am going to handle her when she's a teen and as big as me. I don't like to think about it. If I knew this was going to be my life, I would have never had her. When I was pregnant, my husband and I agreed that if we found out the fetus was going to have Down syndrome or some other special needs, we would bail out. You cannot detect autism in the womb. My husband and I have aged 20 years. We're overweight from stress eating. We're constantly on edge that she's going to give herself a concussion because she self-harms and we cannot stop it every time. We're sleep deprived. There's no sex life. Our brains are fried from all the screaming and constant noise. We argue and are short-tempered with each other. We are empty shells of what we used to be. Imagine having a monkey on your back 24/7 that just screamed and hit you. It breaks a person. We've been in weekly therapy for years, and I probably break down at least once a month during a session. I never, ever thought we'd have a special needs kid. There's no family history, and like I said, I took amazing care of myself while pregnant. She was planned. My husband and I waited until we were financially stable to have her. We did everything right. We wanted more children, but now I've decided not to have any more because it would be too much stress. I mourn what could have been. I wonder all the time how my life would be if she was just a typical kid. If you want to put yourself in the headspace of a parent who has a profoundly special needs kid, watch the movie Vivarium. It's about a couple who get stuck in this weird suburb that they cannot escape and are forced to raise this strange alien childlike being until they die of exhaustion. It's an odd science fiction alien monster type of movie that's meant to be pure fantasy, but for me, it was the realest movie I've ever watched. But even after all that, I still love her so much, and I won't put her in a care center or in foster care. I'd be worried sick that she was being neglected or abused. When she's an adult, we're either going to turn our basement into a living space for her and hire an aide to help her, or we'll put her in an adult special needs home and visit her frequently to make sure she is okay. I just hate that it has to be this way. None of us deserve this life. If you see parents with special needs kids out at the store or mall or whatever, please just be patient and kind. Story 3. My parents divorced before I was 1. My dad likes to go on and, all my problems are from sex addiction, nothing's my fault, rant since I was like effing 7. My mom loved me until I hit about 8 or 9 and she got distant and wanted another kid, but didn't remarry or anything, so she adopted. Suddenly I had no mom. I had 2 pairs of pants and 4 shirts, a ratty old jacket, and a ratty old pair of shoes. While my sister at 2 had clothes bursting in 3 closets of the house. I was bullied a lot for it. It stayed like that. The day she got the kid she wanted without baggage, I didn't exist. She paid for my sister's braces, but not mine. She paid for acne medicine for my sister, not me. And the other day went on a, can you imagine having nothing but soap and water tangent? Yeah, I can, female dog. She takes my sister on vacation every year, but not me. When we were kids and now as adults, usually over my birthday. They usually take a cruise for a week covering my birthday. Occasionally they forget my birthday. Most years as a kid, I asked for family time together. Never happened. Funny enough, we both need a rare QOL surgery. She always said there was no money to help me. Guess who she's paying for when she found out she had it? Having toxic parents is so hard. So much becomes normalized. I still love my mom a lot and routinely sacrifice for her. I don't think she'd mourn me. It all got worse when I came out. My grandma started calling me slurs and blames me for my sister liking her less over it. If I could have anything in the world, it'd be a family that loves me. I'd give up anything to have people who give a crap about me. I felt my face burn, felt naval surgeons cut into my face while awake. I've been through violent death, conflict, and violent SA. Cakewalks next to a family who doesn't love you back. Story 4. This is a story of a very close friend of mine, on a bit different note, but I guess it could fit in some light. He was abused as a kid, violence and mentally by both parents, and was scared of ever even getting close to kids. In fear he would hurt them in some way. He is generally a really meek but caring person, like a total opposite of what he got at home. This was just his way of coping, as kids literally clung to him. Then he met a loving woman and they married. She slowly warmed him up to being around younglings. It helped she works in a preschool and daycare, and finally they both decided it was okay to go. 2 attempts, sadly, and a little over a year later, he was holding a small baby in his arms. His eyes, his hair, her face, her smile. He told me during the pregnancy he was super happy and did everything he could for his wife and future junior. He started loving it, truly. And when he felt it kicking, he was internally overflowed with happiness that a small human was growing there and he or she will have dreams, laughs, and hurdles. Yet standing there, he felt nothing. Like no spark, no love, no happiness, no resentment, no joy, nothing. He was holding small, hot, moving pieces of meat, which he had absolutely no attachment to, and it crushed him. The talk with the wife crushed him even more. He did everything he could to care for her and hope he will grow to love, but it never came. As soon as time allowed, he went into therapy, and after 3 years, he heard that sometimes this just happens. His daughter is now 6, is healthy and happy as far as I can tell, but I've heard my share of his pain. He feels inferior as a human for deceiving his daughter, and he powers through it by sheer willpower and effort. If I can't love her, At least I will still try to give her something I couldn't have, a caring home. He told me exactly once that he really regrets agreeing to have a kid, but I could feel his shame. His wife is a wonderful person enough to accept him like this. She told us, my fiance is more of her support than I am, she wanted more kids, but she is really afraid to put more on him. Raising one will be enough of a challenge for them, that's for sure. I know he will keep all his promises and words, but it already takes a toll on him. Story 5. This is kinda crazy because I was just thinking about this today. I'm not going to use a throwaway or anything, not that I think anyone on here would actually know me. When you have a kid, you kind of get this idea in your head on how things are going to be, how you're going to teach them things, share special moments as they learn, and have this cool, amazing bond. Then your kid comes into this world and is not at all what you expect. My kid has special needs and has major developmental delays. He's 2 and basically just lives in his own world, doesn't communicate, doesn't respond to his name, and has basically missed every single milestone out there. So you feel regret, despair, and a whole bunch of other negative stuff, especially guilt. It wasn't his fault he came into this world this way. He didn't ask to be here. So there's a lot of complex emotions going on. However bad it makes me feel though, I just kind of wish he didn't exist. For instance, as I was writing this, I went to the bathroom and in 3 minutes I was gone. He took a dump and forced both his hands into his diaper and smeared crap all over his face and pin and everywhere else. Now my whole apartment reeks, and I had half an hour of cleanup because I left my toddler alone for all of 3 minutes. This isn't the first time this has happened. I just can't connect with him and it has me feeling like I'm just his caretaker rather than his dad. Story 6. Ex-girlfriend baby trapped me. She stopped taking her birth control and didn't tell me. Then cheated on me while pregnant. She was, and still is, a crappy person. At that point, I wanted nothing to do with her and was not prepared to be a father. I was young and dumb and still learning who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. She gave me the option to walk away and never see the kid again. I thought about it, but I couldn't bring myself to. Knowing my kid was out there was going to weigh heavily on my conscience. It was difficult at times. While my friends were studying, partying, traveling, I was working and learning to be a father. I didn't want this kid, but here I was, and I was going to make the best of this situation. My daughter is 13 now, and I have full custody. Her mother is a piece of crap, and my daughter is old enough to know the difference. She's with me now, and I couldn't be happier. My daughter is a driving force in my life. I need to be responsible. I need to be accountable. I need to be financially successful. It keeps me going forward and has really made me the man I am today. Having a kid when you're barely 20 has ways of making or breaking someone. My daughter was the child I didn't want, but ended up being the one I needed. That's good. Story 7. I am really not proud to share this, but I went through a period of bad addiction resulting from mental illness and an abusive relationship with the dad. So I actually had a period of time where I didn't want my children. Not as in I didn't want them to exist, I do and always have loved them, but I didn't want them with me, basically because I knew that I was incapable of taking care of any of us. So I was constantly overwhelmed, exhausted, and just wanted everything to stop. It was the worst and most heartbreaking period of my life because they deserved so much better. And I knew it, but I couldn't give that to them, and every time they showed me any kind of affection, I just wanted to break down because I didn't feel like I deserved it and I didn't really know how to react. I am happy to say that I am now getting my crap together and we have a good relationship. I'm extremely grateful that they're still young and have no memories of the bad times. At any rate, the problem was with me, not them, and I have no respect for any parent who sees it otherwise. Story 8. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but due to the way this world is and how evil people really can be, and for the fact that people have ruined my level of patience, knowing children require a ton of patience, I don't want children. I'm only 22 and barely have my own life together, and yet I'm sitting here with my 10-month-old niece as she makes Donald Duck noises, squealing and laughing and playing with containers of applesauce. For the past 3 months, I've had custody of her, and I don't know when things will change. I didn't ask for this. Either I have to hold back tears so many times either because I'm hecka frustrated or because of how tiny and innocent she feels in my arms when I hold her, and my love for her doubles in that moment. I'm going to be brutally honest. Some days I want to pack up my things and leave her all alone, never to return. But at the same time, I imagine her playing by herself, knowing that somewhere in her little mind, I'll return for her. So I know I can't leave her for 10 minutes, let alone forever. Heck, I've probably broken world records for the fastest poop time to make it back to the room with her just to make sure she hasn't gotten into anything that would hurt her. I do miss my freedom. I miss being able to sleep as long as I want, do what I want, when I want, take 3-hour-long baths, sleep until 3 p.m., walk around naked. But now that time is taken up by a small child that wakes me up at 9 in the morning by using my boob as a handle to pull herself up from laying beside me while singing ba 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 in my ear. I have to deal with being damp all the time from her constant drooling and your clinging. I hate that I have to wake up several times in the middle of the night when she starts crying because her binky fell out of her mouth. I hate that I can't cook or clean or take a shower when I want to because she always wants me to hold her, or she's clinging onto my legs, making maneuvering difficult. I hate having to get her to hold still for 5 extra seconds as I try to comb her hair while she's flinging around like a fish out of water. I hate having to stop going through my Reddit or Instagram feed in order to feed her, and then give her some of my own food as well because she eats like a wild horse. I hate having to put my phone or tablet or laptop away at 9 or 10 p.m. to get her to go to sleep. I hate when she gets fussy and whiny because I'm trying to work and I can't hold her while doing so. I don't want to be in this situation. I want my old freedom back. But at the same time, I know deep down, I wouldn't want her to be with anyone else, and I couldn't go a full 48 hours without seeing her. Waking up every morning to her smiling at me with her 2 little teeth, or her saying, in happiness after every few spoonfuls of food. Watching her face light up as she tries new things, listening to her talk and sing, listening to her abruptly ceasing to cry when I start playing my ukulele. Feeling her wake up in the middle of the night and crawl over to me to use my stomach as a pillow, because that's the only way she'll sleep well. Feeling her wrap her little arms around me and let her head on my shoulder as I pick her up, wanting nothing more than for me to hold her as she falls asleep. Seeing other people hold her is great, but when she sees me, she'll push them away to get back to me. Seeing her learn to walk, clap, and be more vocal. Seeing all of my cats pile up with her and nap with her. Seeing her imitate how they walk and turn knees off the floor. There are times when I'm angry and frustrated because she refuses to go to sleep. Admittedly, there have been moments where I pick her up and lay her down rougher than intended, and I'll tell her in an angry voice to go to sleep. And what does she do? She laughs. She thinks it's hilarious. And at that point, the sheer innocence. I can't get mad at her for wanting nothing more than for me to play with her. She watches me in awe as I dress myself. She'll laugh as I use a jade roller on my face. She'll laugh as she opens and closes the flap to my iPad, watching it light up and turn off. She helps me eat nasty food I don't want. She helps me remember to remain calm, be patient, and think before acting. She helps me remember that there is a reason that I'm alive, and that there is someone in this world that needs me right now. She reminds me that maybe I do care about life and living more than I want to believe. So you ask, what is it like having children you don't want? It's scary. It's painful, annoying, frustrating, tiresome, damp, smelly, and it makes you want to punch a brick wall until your fist is reduced to a bloody piece of shredded meat. But before you throw that punch, you feel tiny, warm hands on your face, sparkly bright eyes looking into your own, and a big, perfect, toothless smile singing softly to you in a high-pitched, pleasant little voice, knowing that it belongs to someone who knows nothing about anything, but the only thing they do know is that you love them. And they love you. And while I would completely do things a bit differently the next time, I would go through it all over again if I had to. Oh, guys, I'm struggling with these. Oh, it's just like that, the love in the darkness, man. It's good. It's good. Story 9. I don't know if I fall into that category, but sometimes I feel like I do. I love my kids, and I'm told I'm a pretty good dad, and sometimes I enjoy it. But most of the time, it's just draining. I explain it as being like an introvert at a party full of strangers. It's not that caring for kids is painful or whatnot, just like talking to strangers isn't painful. It's just draining. It sucks the energy out of you, whether you're good at it or not. At a party, my goal is that the people I talk with feel heard and cared about and have fun, and that no one knows I'm secretly watching the clock waiting to leave. And with my kids, my goal is that they're happy and engaged and feel loved and wanted and cared for, and don't think I'm counting the seconds to bedtime. But accomplishing that drains me. I understand that there are people out there who enjoy spending time with kids, just like there are people who enjoy talking to strangers, and suffice it to say, I'm just not one of them. So I guess I want my kids, but I really want is for my kids to magically be old enough that they're no longer draining, and for me to get my life back a little. I mean, I love them and I want them to be happy, and if anyone ever tried to take them from me, I would go to hell and back to prevent it. But when was the last time I took a bike ride? When was the last time I looked forward to the weekend rather than seeing it as an exhausting slog? When was the last time I went into Monday a little rested rather than just beaten down and exhausted? And, as importantly, when's the next time I'll get to do so? 5 years from now? 10? Will I be young enough to even enjoy it? So, I don't know if I'm in this category, probably not, but I definitely do feel that way a lot more than I'd like. Story 10. I knocked up a booty call back in the day when I could still pull that off. We had an agreement. Her idea that if she did end up pregnant, I would pay to get rid of it. She was on birth control and we went for months with no problems. Then I called it off because it felt icky. A few months pass and we see each other again one time. I hear from her a few months later and she's got something to tell me. I thought maybe she had an STD. She said she was pregnant and I was like, oh, okay, no big deal. I'll take care of that for you. I'll start making some calls. Then she said she's keeping the baby and I almost lost my crap. Fast forward 17 years and I love my daughter more than anything. I did not expect this, did not want this, but I'm so happy I have my daughter. Her mother, on the other hand, has continued to make my life a living heck in every way possible, always putting my daughter in the middle of fabricated dramas, always threatening me in every way possible. Cops being called constantly, CPS getting called constantly, tried to get me fired from my job more than once, targeting me financially, and just generally being a terrible person towards me. I do not speak ill of her to my daughter, but she does constantly about me. It took a solid 14 to 15 years until my daughter saw what was happening. She believed her mom that I was some really bad guy and her mom was just a poor victim. After the third time of CPS being called, her mom heard I was drunk at a bar, which was true. I did have too many that night, and we do have a common acquaintances, and used that as evidence that I have a drinking problem. I practically never drink. I was coming home from a movie with my daughter, and she saw the card left on the door from CPS. And that's when it finally hit her. Her mother has been making me a villain and doing everything in her power to screw me over. She called her mom and let her have it. It was really sad, but also rather vindicating. I stayed the line, continued to be a good dad, and do my best to take the high road, and eventually, all the scheming and conniving backfired. My daughter and I have a great relationship, and she also does with her mom, but the poor kid has to deal with this constant resentment her mom harbors towards me for initially trying to stick with her plan, then breaking it off, but still taking her to court to make sure I got split custody. I did the good guy things, and I am starting to finally see my efforts resulting in some change. Anyways, it's a kid I did not want with a mom who I definitely do not want. But I quickly decided to do the right thing, and literally as soon as my kid was born, I became smitten, and I love my daughter more than anything now. Story 11. I have spoken with a woman who feels nothing towards her kids. She had them because that is what the church requires and her husband wants them. But I don't think it's just the kids. Even though she says she loves her husband, I don't think that's what she feels for him. She was picked on severely growing up and he really is good to her. I think it's thankfulness that she feels and confuses it with love. Anyways, she knows that it's wrong, her words, to not love her kids and decided to view parenting as a project with the best possible outcome is to have her children grow into healthy, happy, and well-adjusted adults. She did clarify that she doesn't hate them or resent them. After all, they were a part of her life plan, so she made up a way following all the best parenting advice and making sure she follows through. For example, keeps track of how often she cuddles them, by minutes noted in her journal. And if she notices that she hasn't been doing it a lot, she tries to correct it. She also leaves discipline up to her husband because she doesn't want them to associate any negative feelings towards her. She knows they'll eventually be able to recognize her lack of feelings towards them and will think her discipline came from a bad place. From what she told me, she has never explained any of this to her husband and he has no clue how she feels. This conversation lasted about 4 hours and was the moment I realized that you can choose to be a good parent or a bad one. Regardless of how you feel, it's never the child's fault, and an adult is responsible for making up for what they lack. Story 12. My husband and I have been raising my niece for 3.5 years. We also had my teenage nephew for a year before we had her, but growing up with my sister as a mom had done more damage to him than we could handle. My niece is almost 16 now. I'm 29 and I feel like I gave up my fun and careless years to raise my sister's kids. I've always dreamed of having my own children, and now that I'm struggling to conceive, I can't help but feel resentful that I'm raising one of my sister's 6 healthy children. Overall, my niece is a good kid. I love her and I want her to do well in life, but she doesn't feel like she's our kid and she doesn't think of us when she thinks about who her parents are. She experienced a lot of trauma while living with my sister, and it's a lot to handle. She had some negative self-harming and unaliving thoughts and recently admitted to bulimia. Her counselors keep advising us to do more stuff with her and spend more time with her to pull her out of her dark moods. I feel like my mental energy is already 90% devoted to her, and the thought of giving up even more of the 10% reserved for me and my husband is incredibly daunting. It doesn't help that I grew up in a fairly dysfunctional household, and my niece is one of my biggest triggers that brings those issues back up for me. I was just starting therapy to work on my past traumas when my niece started having a bunch of issues, so all of my sessions became about managing her issues instead of dealing with my own. All I wanted when I was her age was somebody to save me from the dysfunction I was growing up in. I feel like I'm giving her exactly what I wanted as a teen, but it's not enough for her, and she doesn't appreciate it. I've also witnessed all of my siblings and my nephew go totally off the rails and into addiction and bad life choices at 15 to 16 years old. So my niece developing a bunch of issues at this age triggered the heck out of me and made me feel like I was fighting against her inevitable downfall. Add that in with the complicated relationship with my sister and the resentment I feel towards her for placing this burden on me, the family I have to maintain contact with so that I'm not keeping my niece from them, and the fact that I'm not my niece's legal guardian, so every medical thing is a huge hassle, and it's all just too much. I feel trapped and feel like I'm sacrificing my own future children on the slim chance that my niece might overcome my family's generational dysfunction. Story 14. It's been a mixed bag. I had my son while I was 22, strung out and going through a massive depression phase. I worked hard and saved money, and then my dad passed away unexpectedly a few months before my son was born. My wife and son moved into our family home, and it was functional. I hadn't stopped using, and it became the only way I could function. I used so I could work on 2 to 3 hours of sleep a night. Outside of working, my wife wasn't very helpful. Then she got caught smoking in the house, and my mom tried to have her arrested. We were kicked out, homeless, and we lost custody of our son in under a week. We managed to pick ourselves up slightly, but we struggled to stop using. I finally got clean and got a divorce. I moved back home and my son was diagnosed with autism. I was working 3 jobs and taking classes. Eventually, I started using again to be able to keep up with everything. Long story short, I'm sober and my son is in college. I'm very thankful for my mother and family for helping me out and providing a safe environment for my son to succeed in. I don't have a very close relationship with my family or my son, his choice. I don't think I ever will. I was there during very important times in my son's development, and I tried as best as I could, but it always seemed like every time things picked up, it always came crashing down. I never wanted to have children of my own, and I don't consider myself a parent even though others tell me I am. It's a difficult thing to reconcile, and I struggle with it often. Story 15. I'm speaking from personal experience with my son and I, and this may be a long one. I never wanted to have kids. It seemed like way too much responsibility for someone like me. I work, I pay bills, I am responsible, but I can only handle so much responsibility. I felt like kids would push me over that line, where happiness would disappear, and to be honest, I was right. It did, in fact, disappear. My son was born a little over a year ago. He wasn't planned. My wife and I welcomed him into our lives with open arms. We loved and cared for him, and still do, and we are trying our best to provide him with a great life. But for me, doing everything I can to provide him with a great life is, in essence, sucking my soul out of me. As time went on, and as it goes on, I become more and more depressed, anxious, and phobic about things in my life that I used to seemingly love. I've went from this super cheery and outgoing individual to a husk of what I was. But my son doesn't know how I feel. When he's in the room, everything is well. It isn't fair to him that I take out my personal demons on him. I love him so much I can't explain it in words. He's a hilarious little kid. He's adorable and incredibly smart, but the responsibility of him is tearing me apart. I hope as he grows older and starts to become more independent, I'll start to feel better. But for now, it feels like the weight of the world is on me. I just have so much empathy for these people who either didn't want or weren't ready for kids, and just like the responsibility and the energy. I can't imagine how much work that takes. I can't even keep a plant alive. So, I love that they're still trying their best and my heart goes out to them, and I hope you guys just keep on, getting better and things keep getting better and feeling better. But again, I respect the effort and I feel for you. Keep it up. Story 16. My son was unplanned but extremely wanted. I, however, was the unwanted child. My mother neglected and abused me for my entire childhood, especially after my brother was born. I'm suspected to be the result of SA, but I will never excuse how I was treated. We moved at least once a year. I never had many friends, and she would lock me out of the house to sleep with strangers and sleep all day. I basically raised my brother and myself because my mom was a junkie who prioritized partying over loving us. She did maintain up to 3 jobs to pay the bills when a boyfriend wasn't paying them, and funding our habits when a boyfriend wasn't paying for them. We were left in the house without enough food to last us for 2 weeks. My brother was 5 and we were starving when his teachers called DSS. We were taken away for a couple of days until my grandmother got custody of us. We lived with her until my mother proved she was capable of handling us. My brother went back and I refused to. I lived with her about a year until my mom found another house and a new man to pay our bills, and I was forced to go back. That man became my stepdad for 12 years, and he is a good man who loves us. She cheated on him, relapsed, and divorced him though. Her current husband was addicted to party drugs and escalated to more drugs, and she escalated with him. She currently lives with my very rich and yet very stupid uncle, who also does some drugs, mainly steroids, and is seeking another divorce. My brother moved with her. I'm okay before anyone asks. I'm 26, my brother is 22, we both work and have lives. I have a husband, a 3-year-old son, and a kitten. I've lived in my first apartment for 5 years. I work for the company that rents it, so I have secure income and insurance. I have a bad history with therapy, so I just learned to cope on my own. I'm still working through a lot of my trauma, including all the abuse and manipulation and mental illness thanks to genetics and my pathetic excuse for an incubator mother. But she's 1,000 miles north of me, and I'm happy with my little life despite the issues I have. I have hobbies that I share with my husband, who is my anchor, and we support one another unconditionally. You can get on top of life again. You can get away from the torment. You are the author of your story, and even when the dark points come, you will find your way through if you just hope a little bit. Wishing love and light to all my fellow children in adult bodies. We have one another. No matter what, we are not alone. Story 17. Sure, I'll share, but throwing in a question back to you, Sniper Glizzy, any particular reason you're asking this? Is there something you want to talk about? You can DM me anytime if you don't feel like revealing too much in the comments. I'm told I'm a good listener. Right. No short version for this really, but I'll try to stick to the important details. About 3 years ago, I hit the wall. Bad. Among many reasons, my relationship was in a rut, and I was struggling to accept the full reality around my firstborn being handicapped. CP, epilepsy, 3-year-old at the time and 6 now, diagnosed as mentally disabled last summer for what it's worth. Skip forward a bit and we tried couples counseling. Although I felt very done, a kid with special needs really changes the effort you'll put into it. Fast forward a year. It's very slow, but we are making some progress, both with the relationship and in other parts of life. She had finally gotten a real job after struggling for many years, helping both the overall mood and financially that we struggled with. Then it happened. She was pregnant. The first I'm fine with, we were careless, but not this time. We had talked about it just a few months earlier even, that we can't risk an unexpected child right now, so she was taking the pill. That's right, she was taking birth control pills and it seemed to work fine until one day, she was knocked up. I knew what she was thinking, but I still voiced my concerns. I don't remember exactly what was said, but we talked for a long time and there was a lot of crying. What about our first one? He will be starting school and require a huge amount of attention while this one is less than a year? I thought should have been reason enough. You finally have a job, but you risk losing that keeping the child, and you haven't worked long enough for full pay during pregnancy yet. How are we going to afford this? Was another. What about us? We are barely making progress on the relationship and have hardly any time for ourselves as it is. How can we hope to ever figure this out with another child right now? It was hard, but I had to speak up. This was about so much more than just the new child. We'll figure something out, was all she ever replied. I told her I think she is putting all of this at risk by keeping it. I didn't say it quite as blunt as this, but I was very clear on my opinion. As she cried so bad she had trouble talking, I said something along the lines of, "You can't be surprised to hear this. We have talked about this and I thought we agreed." And what she replied broke my heart. "I was expecting some, but not that you were this against it. We had talked. We had agreed. More children, sure, but wait a few years." So to try and wrap up stuff here, guess what happened? I caved that night, and from that point I did everything I could to be supportive. Never once mentioned my concerns again and was there every step along the way. Every checkup, up to and including the birth itself, I was there. I did the waking nights a month or two so she got rest. I changed my work hours completely around to make both enough money to cover her loss and get more time at home. I did everything I could up until about a year after the birth. I could handle it no longer. So we broke up. I was right. Finances, not a huge issue, but we struggled. Relationship, dead. Special needs kid, in my eyes, not getting what he needed from us. Both of us deep in exhaustion to the point of mental collapse. Myself even. Got onto antidepressants to try and keep up. Like my doctor said, for the kids, they need their father. But I couldn't handle it anymore. There's no way to explain it in a way that makes sense just reading it here, but there was no way further here, even just for the kids, sadly. I try my best, but it's hard now, especially when the younger one gets tantrums and I'm tired. In the helplessness, we parents feel like we can't comfort our kids. And then the thought pops up. I was right. This would end us. Let me make one thing clear though. I never think it's the child's fault. He had no say in this. He didn't ask to be born. But it's hard to ignore how he symbolizes the final nail in my coffin. So yeah, congratulations on reading through this wall of text that is my life the last few years. Not sure what more to add without rambling or going off topic, but if anyone has questions, feel free to ask. Already said so much, there's hardly anything to hide here. Lastly, if anyone here is looking for hope for a struggling relationship, a child does not make things better, ever. Fix the relationship before you put another soul between you, for the kid's sake at least. Story 18. It's hard. I never wanted kids. I have two. I love them more than anything and do everything I can to make sure they're safe and happy. My wife was a stay-at-home mom. I raided my retirement account to keep up with the bills. I sold $60,000 of stock 2 years ago that's worth almost $200,000 now. It was a sacrifice to make sure that my kids would have a parent at home. There were times that if I could have gone back in time and not have kids, I would have. I think as I'm writing this, it's the first time I wouldn't go back if I had the chance. Things are better now. Although I'll hit my retirement age when my younger child graduates college, my wife is working and made almost as much as I did and about twice what she ever made in the past. Taxpayer-funded college would sure help out now. Even if you want kids, raising them is about the hardest thing you'll ever do. Therapy helped me and my wife. And we also did some couples therapy. Story 19. My husband has raised my 13-year-old for 7 years, but she isn't his biologically. You would never know that. He loved her first, I think. She is the result of an essay by an ex-boyfriend. From conception to DNA tests to court, I hated her, but I also couldn't get rid of her. Almost out of spite, she didn't do anything wrong, but everything about it made me sick. Everyone knows how she came about. She does as well. Finished her therapy around 11 for it. From the moment she was born, she was a carbon copy of my attacker. I wouldn't hold her. My mom and sister stepped in when I checked out mentally. I wasn't afraid I would hurt her, but I was afraid of my ambivalence. I found fault with everything. Heck, even calling me mama as a toddler instead of mommy upset me. In my mind, I was raising a little essayer, but I just couldn't let her go even though I loathed her. Then when she was about 3, she had a grand mal seizure. I held her lightly on the floor so she wouldn't hit her head while we waited for the ambulance. Was diagnosed with epilepsy and my heart was torn out of my chest. Seeing her so small in the hospital bed with IVs in her arms and terror in her eyes, it broke my resolve. It broke me. She reached out her little hand to me, and in that moment, it didn't call my mom to come. I took her back. I never should have forsaken her in the first place. It makes me sick. The guilt eats at me every day. I realized I survived everything just to hate the result. I fought back just to hate her existence. It didn't make any sense. I fell head over heels in love with my toddler. I will never forgive myself for my absences in the first 2 years of her life and all the beautiful things I missed and threw away. She's 13 and I'd do anything for her. Follow her anywhere. I would kick in the gates of hell for her. I would find a way. She is the love of my life, and she knows it. Story 20. I'm not seeing a lot of first-hand responses, so I'll jump on the grenade. I have 2 sons. Despite loving them very much and wanting the best for them, my life would be much better if I hadn't had them. My whole life growing up, I expressed doubts that I wanted kids because kids freak me out. Everyone always said that it would be different when it's your own kids. I'm sure for some people it is, but for me it's not. I think I have some kind of phobia of kids. I'm on the autism spectrum, as is my oldest son, and I hate that I helped bring 2 people into this world that I can't be there for. I wanted to be a good father, and all things considered, I'm still not terrible, but I don't enjoy my time with my kids the way I should. My wife and I separated when our boys were still young due to other issues in our relationship. She has since remarried to a great guy who is wonderful with our boys. She moved about 5 hours away, but I still visit them on big holidays and their birthdays. I pay my child support without fuss. I'm happy knowing my boys are happy, but it's a weight taken off my shoulders that I'm not having to care for them because I just can't. If there was a moral to this story, I would say that if you think you might not be able to handle kids, it's perfectly okay to not have them. Make sure that it's known early in the relationship. Don't expect your partner to change because they'll be expecting you to change as well. And one if not both of you, will end up unhappy. The bonus moral is never trust anyone who wants to use the rhythm method of birth control. Story 21. I was made to feel that having children was my only use, and that stuck with me hard. I have 2 kids, and the last one was with my husband. He made me feel that way too, and I got my tubes tied. I could scream at the freedom that my body is mine to do with as I please, and everyone could go take a jump. F my family and that ex for gaslighting me and making me feel that because I was pregnant I had to keep them, and F me if I needed support. I used to scream and cry whenever I drove because I was stuck in a hole and no one would help me. I overheard my mom talking to my sister through a cracked door that I was a female dog because I was pregnant. I had to suffer mental abuse from parents who could hardly be brought to show their love. I talked to my husband about this a couple years later, and he apologized and said he is ashamed for his part. My kids are 2 and 4, and I treat and teach them the best I can. You could say I spoil them, but I call it love. I always keep in mind that I am better than my family. Shame on my parents for who I am. Shame on me if I stay that way. A quote from my corrections professor that I always remember. Do I want kids? F no. But I have them, and I'm going to do my best and be there for him. F people that bully you mentally, emotionally, and physically into doing their choices when it's your body. Story 22. I never really wanted children, as I had a good career and a life full of adventure. When I got pregnant, unexpectedly, my partner convinced me that we could have a kid and be good parents. We got married and I had a pregnancy full of complications. I had lost a ton of weight before being pregnant and I resented every moment of my pregnancy. I struggled tremendously with postpartum depression and it took me almost 2 years to feel like myself again. 10 years later, I'm no longer with my husband and I raised my kid pretty much on my own. While the role of mom is something I came into reluctantly, I do love my child very, very much. I don't think we have a traditional parent-child relationship, but I work hard to be a good mother and I constantly think about how to be a good parent, different from how my parents were with me. There are days where I feel like an absolute failure, but there are more days where I feel like I'm raising a pretty wonderful human being, who is so much more insightful and wise than I was at her age. I wouldn't say that I regret having a child, but I didn't enjoy the early years at all. It felt like an uphill battle every day. Everyone says they're born and you just fall in love and it comes naturally. I didn't find that to be true. Creating a real bond and a real relationship took a lot of work, and it forces me to confront a lot of issues with my own upbringing that can be uncomfortable sometimes. But it's making me a better person. I think a lot about the life I may have had if I remained childless, but I don't think I would change things. I try hard to find a balance between maintaining an interest in the things that made me and giving my kid the best of everything I can. Some days are better than others, but I will say that my kid displays more love for me than I ever thought possible, and the love I have for her is unlike anything I've ever experienced before. So, while it may not have been what I envisioned for myself, it's a role that I've grown into and continue to work at. Story 23. One of my first serious relationships was with a guy who was older than me and recently separated from his wife. The reason for their separation was that she lied about being on birth control to get pregnant with their third child after he explicitly said no and that they couldn't afford another child. The backstory is that he came from a wealthy family and there were expectations for his life and children: private school, country clubs, expensive home, etc. He was supposed to do all of this on a single upper middle class salary. Meanwhile, she had a vision for her life that included 3 children by 30, getting the tummy tuck, and being a stay-at-home wife who went to book clubs and charity events for the rest of her life. To be fair, this is what his family expected for their life too. They were badly in debt trying to maintain this lifestyle. When he said absolutely not to a third child because they couldn't afford it, she did it anyway. I remember taking his kids to the park with him when his youngest was about 6 months old and was shocked at his just complete and total contempt for his kid. Everything this kid did annoyed him, like he was the hugest burden in the whole world. There were moments where he would talk about a snarky comment made by his family and I would see his eyes move to his son with just a look of annoyance. It was really sad. I heard the same tone in his voice every time he talked about this child, but seeing it in person was really heartbreaking. I don't think he necessarily resented his son because of the lifestyle he couldn't have, but because of the shame and pressure of his family that he wasn't living up to their expectations. I'm also not sure he didn't see the kid as a symbol of her betrayal. He made some comments that alluded to that as well. It's a lot of crap to put on a little kid who had no say in it. I know it was still fairly fresh at that point, so I'm hoping times changed things. He and his ex-wife tried to reconcile after we split, also family pressure, and failed, but I know they went to counseling during that time and he was going on his own as well. Basically, I really hope he's at least healed his relationship with his kid because I was so sad for him. Story 24. I can actually answer this. I was 19 when I had my daughter. At first, when I found out I was pregnant, I already knew I wasn't going to keep it, so I made an appointment. But then a few days before the procedure, my mom forced me to go to a doctor with her. That's where they told me, with my mom in the room, that I was expecting. Now, my mom can't really have more kids, so when she found out, she was insanely happy and I didn't have it in me to tell her that I was ending it. So I went through with the pregnancy and gave birth a few months later. From the moment the baby was born, I was already showing signs of being a neglectful mother. For one, my mom had offered to let the baby sleep with her from the first day she arrived from the hospital in case anything happens, so I never even slept with my daughter. Worst yet, I had insomnia. so I would fall asleep during the day when I was supposed to be taking care of her. She fell off the bed and hurt herself multiple times and went without eating for a bit because I didn't even know how to tell when she was hungry. This is literally like a child taking care of a child because I clearly hadn't matured at all yet. Eventually, when my daughter was 2, I realized I was doing more harm than good and decided to leave and move to an apartment. I knew I couldn't take her with me because my mom was too attached, and I knew that if I took her, she wouldn't be taken care of by me. I mean, I could try, but all I did at the time was smoke and take naps during the day. I imagine if I allowed my daughter to be around that, not happening. After I left, I got an amazing job and my relationship with my mom got better. So after a few years, I moved back in to help with the rent. By then, my daughter was 6 and had forgotten I was ever her mother. I did try to be that figure for the first year, but I started feeling like I was forcing it on her, so I told my daughter she can call me her birth mom instead and call my mom, her grandmother, mom as well. Since she was calling my mom, mom anyway, this seemed to work and everything is fine so far. Everyone in my family still resents me for abandoning my child, but no one thinks it's because I found myself inadequate to be the mom. They think I just bailed for no reason. But I don't hold it against them because I'm not exactly a saint either. I was a horrible person, I know that. But I promise that I always made sure she was in the best hands she could be. And now she's a really happy girl and it's like the past never happened. But after all this, I'd be lying if I said I didn't resent myself and my mom a little because of how we reacted when we were told I was pregnant. I could have told her I wasn't ready, and I think she knew. But we're Catholics. No way is getting rid of it happening with her knowing. Funny, the one time I needed my mom to say no to me, to tell me I was still a kid and I can't do this, she didn't do it. Instead, she kept the baby for herself because she knew she couldn't have one. So here I am at 27, with a beautiful daughter I didn't want at 19. All this taught me is that I can't be a mother, so I'm probably not going to have any more kids. Story 26. The first night home with my firstborn, I cried. I didn't understand why anyone would give me a child. I told him I was sorry, but I was probably going to ruin his life. I didn't know how to be a mother. His father was abusive and having an affair. I was scared alone and didn't want to be a mom. Years later, my youngest son was 10, his brother was 12, and asked me, "Mom, what would you be doing if you didn't have us?" Me, "You don't want to know the answer to that question." Him, "Yes, we do." Me, "I'd be on a beach somewhere, drinking a beer. I'd be doing whatever the heck I wanted to do. I wouldn't be a taxi driver for a bunch of kids." I then spent the next half hour explaining to them that they weren't planned and I didn't want children. But I didn't know them, so it wasn't personal that I didn't want kids. But if I had to do it again, I'd still opt for no kids. I also explained that having kids is a huge responsibility, and if I really didn't want them, they would be living with their grandparents or my sister who desperately wanted children, but was unable to have her own. I also explained how hard it was to support them. After my divorce, I remember getting paid, depositing my check, and having $6 in my account after bills, gas, and groceries. I cried that day, and it soon became my norm. I would pay my bills before I put my check in, so I wouldn't be tempted to spend my money on frivolous things. I left their dad and dedicated the last years of their childhood focused on them. My world revolved around them and making sure they didn't follow in their father's abusive footsteps. I really hate that society makes women feel bad for admitting they didn't want kids, especially the women who become great mothers but still feel like they are stuck. Story 27. Think of an animal you don't like being around. Could be anything from a horse to a rat or a snake. Now imagine hearing your whole life that even if you don't like being around that animal, if you had one of your own, it would be completely different. After years of pressure and guarantees it will be great, you finally agree to have said animal with your partner. So you get this animal and all of the promises about love and bonding and enjoyment and being different are all lies. You still don't like being around that animal, but now you're 100% accountable for the well-being of that animal at all times. You are a hostage to that animal and will be for the next 18 plus years. The stress of being a full-time caretaker for this animal ultimately leads to a variety of physical and mental breakdowns. Money and time that used to be spent enjoying yourself are now spent on the animal. Every little thing is a fight with that animal. They do things specifically because they know you disapprove. You slip into deep depression and substance abuse runs rampant. The single remaining goal is to set that animal free in the wild, hopefully before you are completely physically and mentally disabled or dead. 4 years into it. That's the short summary of my experience. I try not to talk or think about it. Yes, I've been to multiple counselors and avoid this alt account as well as the parenting subs because I put a lot of effort into burying how I really feel. Then a question like this comes along my main account and it bubbles everything up to the top, making the next few weeks hellish after I respond, then try to bury it back down again. Story 28. My son has Down syndrome and I find basically no joy in life anymore. I've brought him to group up with other kids, but he's simply not happy enough as an individual to interact with other people with disabilities. Not like other kids with Down syndrome. He acts happy and smiles, but as soon as you turn your back, he's beating them with chairs or other objects, and he throws items and jumps on the ground and withers in pain too, making it look like it was a fight and there were no winners. Just yesterday, I went to go put on my boots and shovel snow because I got notice in the mail, which he took and hid, and it said if I didn't get my driveway shoveled by 4 p.m., then I would get another $200 ticket from the city, which I absolutely cannot afford. I go to put on my boots and smash my foot into a pile of chewed up hot dogs and ketchup from hot dog night the night before. I go outside and look for my snow shovel. It's gone. Now it's 3:45. I get the ticket. At 9 p.m., I find the snow shovel under his bed. My wife, his mother, passed away 4 years ago. As she was passing from a blood infection, the family brought him in to say goodbye. He immediately yells, "Scooch over, Ric Flair!" and pushed her off the hospital bed, and she hit the ground, and that was that. He's cynical. I sometimes convince myself he doesn't even have Down syndrome. He just looks like he does. At this very moment, he's playing with Lego by standing in the kitchen and tossing in pieces into my split pea soup. I wouldn't really be concerned because I normally could just take them out and eat dinner, but he's specifically using green Lego pieces because they resemble peas. I know he knows. They resemble peas and he knows it. Like once a week, I find empty wrappers for Hostess snacks inside his pillowcase, and he has diabetes. I have no effing idea where he is getting these snacks from. Nobody even comes over to the house. I managed to get a girl to come over from Tinder once, and I swear he was asleep. And she comes up to the house, and I'm leaving the bathroom to answer the door before she could knock and wake him up, and I hear, "Are you Dave from Tinder?" And he says, "Yep, but I'm Dave, and his name is Thomas, and he knows this." And she ran back to her car before I could even move out of the way to tell her that I'm the real Dave, and he wouldn't move from the doorway. So as soon as I touched him to get him to move over, he punched me in the eye and says, "You snooze, you lose." Like that even makes any effing sense. I pretty much hate my life. Story 29. I won't say didn't want, because I certainly wanted and love both of my children. But for my daughter and I, we were one of those unfortunate sets of parent and child that just didn't bond. For those of us that have had that happen, intellectually, we know that it's common. Emotionally, that doesn't matter at all. It is still horrible and painful. I was so happy to be pregnant and have a little girl, which is what I wanted, and we did bond when she was a baby up to that point, but once she reached late toddlerhood, 3 or 4, something just failed, and it was a struggle from that point forward. Once she got into first grade, she started having trouble, and as it turns out, she had ADD. No hyperactivity, thank goodness. In fact, quite the opposite. She herself will joke nowadays that she won't move unless she's being chased. But the behavior was something that I, as a very young mom, had little to no understanding of how to parent an ADD kid. At that time, it was just starting to be understood as a thing. There was no internet, so it's not as if I could just pop on a computer and start researching it. Home PCs weren't a thing yet either, so all of my assistance and information came through her pediatrician and our counselors. And yes, we went to a lot and went through several medications and other things. It was a struggle. She was an absolute black hole of need for attention, and nothing I ever did, normal mom stuff that is sufficient for most kids, worked. It just whet her appetite for more and more and more. We are just now, she's in her 40s, getting to the point where we're working on our relationship, and she's starting to understand that all the things she internalized were just her imagination. Mostly what we all felt was confusion. We had no idea what to do, how to help. But to her, she felt as if no one thought she was good enough. A normal reprimand, as you might give a child on something small and insignificant, such as, "Get down off there!" Well, she remembered them all, built them up to epic proportions, and carried them around with her long into her adulthood as proof of her being a failure. Now, this is a gorgeous, she actually did some modeling in her youth, and super intelligent young woman. She also tested off the charts academically, but not emotionally, while in school. So she basically won the genetic lottery. Tall, beautiful, blonde, high IQ, gifted, the works. How did I feel? Guilty. All of the time, struggling all of the time. I could never make her feel secure and loved. Especially when my son was born just before my daughter entered the teen years. He was a surprise. He was such a little monster, way too much energy. His dad spoiled him rotten. He was a tough toddler to have. But with him, it was just so easy. Even in spite of all that brattiness, which lasted until about 9 or 10, we clicked, we bonded, connected. The ease of being his parent compared to my vast failure with my daughter was night and day. In one way, it was good, at least I wasn't one of those cold monsters who couldn't parent at all. But in the most important way, it was awful, because I still couldn't find a way to reach her, to be what she needed from me. What is it like? It's painful. No matter how hard you try, you just can't breach that lack of bonding. And more, you carry the guilt of it being your own dang fault no matter what. My daughter and I have spent a lot of time talking about this as we work it out, and she's constantly reassured me that she's not blaming me. None of that matters though, I still blame myself. I should have found a way. Story 30. My first husband was abusive in every sense of the word. He had untreated bipolar disorder and severe anger issues, isolated me from my family, etc. Long story short, he made my life a living nightmare for 6 years before the final FU of committing self-unaliving in front of me when I finally decided to take our 2 kids and leave him. Our oldest son, now 9, looks just like me and is sweet and sensitive. Our 6-year-old, however, is the spitting image of him and has oppositional defiant disorder and ADHD. It's like he's a mini version of his piece of crap father with the way his tantrums and outbursts are. He's broken 2 windows in his room, tried to push his older brother down the stairs, he hits and kicks, etc. We're finally starting treatment for him, but it's been very hard on all of us. I have since remarried to a wonderful man and had 2 more children, another boy and girl, and every day I wish my middle son would just disappear from my life. He's put a strain on our marriage, our mental health, and the safety of all of our other kids. I seriously fear he's going to turn out just like his dad, and I hate him for that. Even as a baby, he would bite me during nursing, pinch the backs of my arms, and rip the hair out of the back of my head to the point I had 2 huge bald spots for months. Occasionally, he can be so loving and sweet. But the second things don't go the way he wants, he turns into a violent monster just like his dad would do. It scares me, the look he gets in his eyes sometimes, and he has no empathy whatsoever. Of course, I do everything I can to help him and make sure he knows he's loved and cared for, but if I had the chance to send him away and wash my hands of it, I'd do it in a heartbeat. It feels like I can never get away from my abusive late husband because our son is just like him, like a punishment of sorts. It's rough. Story 31. My father didn't want kids, but my mom did. So mom managed to get knocked up with me immediately after the wedding. Dad put up with it for a little, but they got divorced when I was 2, and he had no custody until he was granted weekend custody of me when I was 8. His version of taking care of me on the weekends was to sit me down in front of the TV, turn on Star Wars, and, on occasion, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and a cup of water would appear on the coffee table in front of me. There were also a few sets of Legos that my paternal relatives had given me. Those were my weekends. Didn't do anything with him, didn't know anything about him, just that there was Star Wars, sometimes Star Trek, and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And I spent every spring and summer break on my paternal grandmother's farm. My paternal family was great. My grandmother once apologized to me when I was 13 or 14 about my dad being such an a-hole. My mom then, unfortunately, died when I was 10, so I was sent to live with him full time. It was like living with a roommate, except he never really changed his shopping habits. So it was like living with a roommate, only there was never enough food in the house, and I would sometimes just wash and eat potatoes raw because I was so hungry, and I would get in trouble if I cooked anything. My friends in high school would all give me parts of their lunches because I was just so hungry. I was 6 foot and only 100 pounds my senior year. He wouldn't let me get a job or give me money. There was no way for me to get food. And he could afford it. He had a very well-paying, cushy job. The instant I left for college, he got remarried and ended up with 3 stepkids that he spoiled rotten. There are photos of them all over the house, but there isn't a single photo of me anywhere. Even my aunts and uncles have commented about how, if they didn't know any better, they wouldn't even know I exist. Dad just shrugs it off and says he doesn't have any photos of me. Of course, now that he's sick, not COVID-related, he keeps calling me and trying to reconnect because he's suddenly remembered that he has a daughter. I'm in my 30s now. I usually let the calls go to voicemail and maybe text him a short hello every other month. He didn't want me, and now it's too late for me to care or want him in my life. For all his reaching out, he refuses to ever come to my wedding. My husband and I were trying to have a ceremony near him where he could come, but he refused, but wants me to divorce my husband and return to the US and take care of him because it's my job. F that. Story 32. My parents wanted kid, but I was not the child they wanted. They wanted a boy who grew up to be a star athlete. I was a girl, born premature, 13 weeks early with a myriad of health problems. I grew up to be an intelligent introvert and thankfully managed to live free of the long-term health conditions experienced by many people who are born very premature. What made the situation more complicated is that my mother lost a boy in her third trimester. He died in the womb with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. He was born dead in January, and I was born premature in November the same year. My mother went on to have another 5 girls, trying to replicate the son she lost. My parents love me, but they don't know me or love me for who I am as a person. I never wanted for anything growing up, but as soon as I was old enough to understand what happened the year I was born, so much about my parents made sense. It has made adult life very emotionally isolating for me, and I've been in therapy for years to try and get over it. I don't blame my parents, and I'm not angry, but I'm a very lonely and sad person most of the time, and I find it hard to allow people to get close to me for fear of rejection and abandonment because I don't live up to their expectations. It's soul-crushing some days, but I'm learning to accept my situation now that I am in my 30s. Story 34. I know this comment will get buried, but this has been happening to me recently, and I could really just use a place to rant. If you do read this, thank you for your time, and I hope that you are doing well and staying safe. Too long didn't read. Never wanted kids, got pregnant at 25, now have a 2-year-old. Love him to death and would do anything for him, but struggle heavily with mental illness, depression plus anxiety, and feel like a horrible parent for not being able to do more and be better. My son will be 2 in April, and while I love him to death, I have just not been coping well these past few months. I love my son so much and want to do everything in my power to give him a good life, but I really struggle. He wasn't planned, birth control failed, and then Plan B pill failed too. And when I found out I was pregnant, it was just a shock to my entire system and being. My partner was amazing and said that no matter what, he would support my choice. In the time we have been together, he has always talked about how much he wanted children. I was very much no children for my early 20s. I thought maybe when we were at a better place financially and whatnot, years away from now, I would consider it. I always thought that if I were to have kids, it would be around 30. So when I found out I was pregnant at 25, it felt like being hit by a truck. In the end, I felt that I just couldn't get rid of it and wanted to keep the pregnancy. My decisions were emotional, but also based on that my partner and I have been together for a long time and want to stay together. Pregnancy was really hard. I feel lucky because I did not have a horrible pregnancy by any means, but it was just really hard physically and emotionally. One reason I never wanted kids was because I suffer from depression and anxiety and have since I was 12. I am in a much better place now than I was even in my early 20s, but it's still something I deal with every day. Giving birth was hard, and again, I feel so lucky that everything went well and he was healthy. He was 2 weeks early and quite small. I struggle daily with feeling like I'm not a good enough parent and that my son deserves so much better than I can give him. He is such an incredible little person whom I love so much. He's definitely a mischief maker and has been high energy since he could move. I found the baby phase hard mostly because of the sleep deprivation, but I could mostly just do what I wanted still. I would honestly spend many days on the couch nursing him while watching TV or playing on the Switch. It was sort of a grieving process having to give up things I love. My partner and I have done our best to still give each other their own time and breaks every day. Recently, my partner has gone back to full-time work, and so I'm full-time parent. Even when he wasn't working, he just finished school last winter semester for his teaching degree, I still felt like I was doing the lion's share of parent work. Now it's even harder because he's gone for most of the day, and when he gets home, he wants to take his break. He really is a great father, and I know he loves our son more than anything, but I can't help but feel a minor resentment that I'm doing the parent work. Last summer, I decided to get back into my art since it's been something I love and have always wanted to do. I was in school for it before getting pregnant. I'm going to launch my own Etsy shop next month, but it's been so hard to be a parent and trying to do this as well. I'm not mad at my son, but sometimes I wish I wasn't a parent so I could just do my own things. Focus on my shop and art and sleep when I wanted. Have the time for just me. Those just aren't my days anymore. I try to get stuff done when I can, but it's hard when you are already exhausted from the day. I had a mental breakdown the other day and straight up told my partner that I did not want to be a mom anymore. It's not entirely true as I love my son and I want to be his mom, but I guess I just need a break, which is pretty much impossible due to COVID. I want to be a good mom. I never ever want my son to feel like he is not wanted, but this was not the life path I ever had in mind. I'm really trying every day to do what I can, but I still feel like I'm failing him. Most days I just have the TV on and then follow him around the house, sit on the floor to play with him, or just sit on the couch while he does his own thing. I feel so bad because some days I just can't keep up with things like giving him a bath or brushing his teeth that night, and they get moved back to the next day. I'm always behind on laundry and dishes. My depression has gotten so bad that the other day I just brought him to our bedroom, put on his favorite show, and we stayed in bed all afternoon. I feel like I'm forcing myself every day, and it's starting to weigh hard. I would never neglect my son and make sure he is good every day, clean, changed, fed, etc. But I feel like just doing the basics isn't enough. I try to teach him and stuff, but I don't know. I feel like I'm not doing good enough. I am in therapy and have been with my therapist since my early 20s. It's helped so much that I haven't had an appointment recently, and even with therapy, it's hard. It doesn't take away from the pain. My coping has been very poor recently. If you read my giant text wall, thank you so much. I really hope that you will have a good day. Take care. Story 35. I never wanted kids. I had a 6-figure job before I was even 30. Promising promotion, great job with a yearly bonus up to 6 months. Then I had the accident. Decided to keep it due to family pressure, and because of my boyfriend was nearing his 40s, age gap of 10 years, had a shotgun marriage and went through bouts of severe prenatal depression. Prenatal depression stemmed from my conflicts of having a child I wasn't expecting, as well as fear of my now uncertain future. It was the most difficult 9 months of my life, but thankfully had psychiatrists who were able to help me with some medication. Then voila! Most beautiful baby girl. I love her with all my heart and can't imagine my life without her. Thankfully, my depression subsided after I delivered my daughter. As for my job, my promotion didn't happen. I moved to another industry that pays me much better, but the scope is the same. Well, can't complain much, at least they pay me well. But I compensate by establishing 2 side companies that I'm building so I can eventually resign from my day job and have more flexibility to manage my role as a mother and still maintain my own personal income. Motherhood is a constant limbo between resentments, guilt, and overwhelming love. I guess I want to have it all, a high-flying job, my 6-figure income, and also be a present mother. But being a mother means sacrificing what you want for your offspring. I'm still trying to find the balance between what I have to do as a mother and getting the things that I want though. Story 36. After a little over a year with our first child and pregnant with child number 2, I realized that my wife doesn't really want our kids. Part of the reason we ended up together was I saw how good she was with other people's kids, so when we got married, we had a plan for everything. I also remember, now looking back, a noticeable decline in our relationship when she got her first iPhone that could access Facebook from anywhere. Looking back, I wish I would have noticed this shift before having kids, but didn't. The first indicators were missing key moments like first steps. I came in from the bathroom with the baby in the middle of the living room with her and her face buried in her phone, completely oblivious. After that, this almost obsessive fixation on getting good pics and video of the babies first to then walk away and not pay any more attention to post them on Facebook. After the second child and the first one, a full-out toddler trying to talk to her and not getting anything. Literally coming over to me and pointing at her and yelling, "Mom," like, "Dad, I can't get this bee to even look at me." He has only gotten worse. It has only gotten worse from there, and now that they are much older and there's a third, condom failures happen, kids. Don't F around. It's obvious to the kids with the 9-year-old asking specifically, "Why doesn't Mom like spending time with us?" When we are playing board games or other family stuff, she will come in for a picture or selfie with the activity to post and then leave. I try not to let it be obvious how much it bothers me in front of them, but I'm sure the older two know. We have talked about it several times, but it never goes good, and I don't want to fight in front of them. The instant I even insinuate that she doesn't actually like having a family but wants to have an online family, she loses it. And before anyone says it, I can't bring myself to leave as we barely make 3 kids work, one with significant special needs, with even the little bit she does, and I always think back to my own parents' divorce, which really messed up my brother and sister around the same age as my kids are now, and obviously skewed my ability to pick up on certain signs. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly what the OP wants to know, but it seems to me that they feel like a constant annoyance or disruption to what she wants to be doing, which is social media 24/7 to her. Feels really good to get that out though. Story 37. I feel for a lot of people on here. Parents who have all these mixed emotions about kids, I'll add myself to that list. My wife and I had been trying for 3 years to have a child. We had just started down the path of IVF when my wife fell pregnant naturally. 9 months, we had a perfectly healthy baby girl. Over the first 2 years of her life, we had a few issues to check over. We suspected she was deaf, she wasn't, and just after the age of 3, we had it confirmed that she was on the spectrum, but only a mild case of developmental delay. I work from home permanently, but my hours are horrific due to the nature of my job and being the guy that follows the sun, working with people from the US to China. My time with my daughter is limited because of this. My wife is amazing, and she has pretty much single-handedly raised this little one. Dealing with her autism, getting her assistance through Portage, arranging government support, schools, getting on the governor's board, sorting out assisted learning while at school. I honestly don't know how she does it. And the bond she has with our daughter is unbelievable. If little one is scared, wants help with something, gets frustrated because she can't do something, has a nightmare, needs help getting on and off her swing, loves that, she will call for her mom. I can be 3 feet away from her. Her mom can be the other end of the house and she'll want her mom. Dad is useful when tickles are required or she accepts help from me on rare occasions. If she ever falls over or bangs her head, as kids do, I could have played no part in it, but I get the death stares like I deliberately put the furniture in the way. I love my daughter very much, and I would do anything for her to make sure she has a happy life, but in my own home, I feel like the ex-husband visiting and I have limited time with her, with which she seems disinterested in. My marriage has, in my mind, disintegrated. We live together, but every spare moment my wife has is with the little one. Once she goes to bed, I want to talk, but my wife is exhausted and just does what she needs for the following day and goes to bed. I support her as best as I can with this, and I do understand how hard she has it. Anyone who says being a mom isn't a full-time job has no idea what they are talking about. Do I hold this against my daughter? Yeah, partially. I gained a daughter but lost a wife and a close friend. I have this feeling we are now treading water until little one is old enough to live on her own. Then my wife and I will go our separate ways. I've often thought that if we hadn't had a child, our marriage would be fine and there wouldn't be the delineation now of them two and me. I would give anything to be a bigger part of my daughter's life and have her trust us both equally, but it doesn't seem that way, and I've resigned myself to being the financial caregiver only to them both for as long as they need. I hate myself for typing this out and putting those inner voices into words, but it's also cathartic in a way. Story 38. All of these answers are cementing my decision to never have children. My mother had her first child at 22. They had me at 23. She and my father divorced when I was 2. 9 years later, she had another child with a different father. When I was around 16, I used to dream of having a little baby to take care of, to dress up and take out to parks. I used to keep thinking that a baby would be so easy to take care of. All you have to do is feed it and change it, right? I started looking into methods of getting pregnant via speed donor, as I was never interested in having relations of any partner or any gender. Then I started looking at the costs of things, the cost of clothes, diapers, medical appointments, daycare, schools, everything. And then reality just sort of hit me. I didn't want a child to raise, I wanted a doll to dress up and show off. I have recently gotten a puppy, and she is more work than I have ever had with raising something that depends on you. Sometimes I hate how often I need to think about her needs. After my dog has grown old and passed away, I will not be getting another. I love her, but I hate how I'm almost held emotional hostage to always be looking at her and wondering, is she hungry? Does she need some fresh air? I work in a medical clinic, and I recoil inwardly when children come in. They're so noisy, often don't do what they are told, and are just annoying in general. My family keeps telling me it's different when it's your own child, and I'm like, yeah, no crap. You are then obligated to take care of them no matter what. Emotional hostage. It's hard to explain to my family that I don't want a partner. I don't want a child. I just want to be left alone so I can do my own thing. Take myself to the movies, go on weekend trips by myself, plan what hobbies I can do on the weekends. If you want children, I urge you to do as much research as possible before committing. Children aren't toys. Story 39. My parents turned the basement into a second home, basically. Each of them had 2 kids from 2 marriages and 1 kid with someone they never married. Us kids had dinner together and cooked the meals. The parents are downstairs and smoked all day. It was 2 kids on my mom's side with the same last name, then my mom, stepdad, and his 2 kids. The third was with his ex-girlfriend with the same last name, then me with a completely different one. Once I was coming home from school the same time my mom came home from work. I offered to grab her lunchbox, and then us 2 youngest kids had to get hers and my stepdad's every day. It made the hour or so waiting for them to come home nerve-wracking. Couldn't leave the living room for more than a minute, otherwise they might get home, honk, then throw the lunchbox on the ground. Oh, and I repeatedly heard the stories about how nobody was planned. They would all be doing something else better had we not been there. Constantly told, I can't wait till you have kids so you can deal with all this bull crap. I just had my 29th birthday. No kids, no plan for kids. My sister has 2, is divorced, and has a partner with 2 kids. She's a great parent because she knows exactly what not to do. My brother has 2 kids with his wife, and she has a kid with a disability. They're fine, again, because they're doing the opposite of my parents. Nobody else has kids, and I don't want them. I can't guarantee I would be a good parent, and I'm not willing to F up a kid like I was. Story 40. I was never anything more than an obligation to my dad, a legal responsibility he was ordered to take care of in the court of law. He never wanted me, I just got in the way of his life, and while he tried to keep that a secret from me, it showed. It was pretty effing obvious. My father eventually started a family with the woman he cheated on my mom with. He loved that family. He became such a great father to my little half-brother and half-sister. Loving, caring, dependable, loyal, and responsible. He did all that while I looked on from the outside. I never really became a part of that family. I was a kid with no place to call home. I remember the moment that I realized that I would never be loved by my father the way I needed to be loved. We were getting drive-through, and it was me, my dad, and my stepsister's boyfriend. I was sitting in the back seat while I watched the two of them chop it up like they had been best friends for years. They had inside jokes, shared crazy stories about shenanigans they had gotten into. He called him Dad. They had nicknames for each other, and my stepsister's boyfriend knew stories about my father's childhood that I had never even heard before. Stories that you only share with people that you love and trust. I remember wanting to break down and cry. I wanted to explode and yell and scream and then die. It hurt so bad. Except I couldn't. I would never cry in front of my dad, not while he's having a good time. That would only ever offend him and make him more ashamed of me, his fat son that he never wanted. I didn't want to ruin their good time. That would only push him farther away from me, make him not care even more. I learned that a long time ago. That was the moment when I learned that I was nothing more than a burden to my father. That's when I learned that I would never be anything more to him than be the son he never wanted. The kid who only got in the way of his life, the son who held him back and ruined his dreams and aspirations. Story 41. I'm married with 2 young daughters. My husband and I both say, on the bad days, that if we could go back in time, we would never have had them. It's not that we don't want them, but when the days are long and hard, you understand why people drop their kids at the fire station. It's exhausting sometimes living with 2 tyrants who consume your entire being in conversations until bedtime. I'm a stay-at-home mom, and my husband is active duty military. I definitely lost a huge part of myself, and I'm getting that back as my daughters get older. My husband, on the other hand, his life has hardly changed at all. I think making time for yourself makes a huge difference in how you feel about your children. I get up between 4:30 and 5 a.m. every single day of the week so I can drink coffee alone and not be spoken to by another human being. It's changed my life a lot. I can wake up and be present without feeling like I have to be at 100% capacity the millisecond one of my children wakes up. I don't think this answers the question really, but I wanted to share. Story 42. It's like living a half-life. Growing up, I always felt like my dad resented my siblings and I because we stood in the way of his ambitions. As someone with strong ambitions of my own, I swore that I would never, ever have kids or would have kids later on in life when I had already made it in my industry and had a steady income and routine. Well, that didn't happen. My first positive pregnancy test was with a guy I'd only known for a month. Though I don't judge others for getting rid of it, I didn't have the heart to do it, and honestly wanted what was best for my child. I already had 2 adoptive families picked out when I told him I was pregnant. I waited 2 months until I gauged if he was the kind of guy I wanted to raise a kid with, which he seemed to be at the time. I gave him the option of us raising her together or giving her to a family who would do a better job of raising her. He said that he would get a full-time job to support the 2 of us, so I decided to keep her. 5 years later, he hasn't held a steady job for over a year. He was a great guy when we met and still is, but having a kid brought out both of our worst issues. And though I decided to keep working on myself and started my own business, started and continued therapy, all the while taking care of our baby, he, on the other hand, for reasons I now better understand, regressed into not working, gaming for hours a day and moving us into a frat house so one of his buddies from college could help watch the baby whenever he wanted to party it up. As an introvert, trying to raise a newborn while sharing a house with 5 bros was a living nightmare and left me with anxiety issues while kind of destroying any personal sense of self I had, because whenever he felt overwhelmed, he would take it out on me and blame me for everything instead of taking up ownership, which was demoralizing when I was already working my butt off while he refused to even update his resume. After almost 3 years of this, I moved out. I got my own place with my daughter and started working several part-time jobs to support us. She gets along with her dad really well, and he stops by to see her at least once a week and is very good to her, but I can't expect any consistent support from him. He still gets in the habit of losing it on me when things go wrong while not holding himself accountable. I know I can take him to court, but it would just be a waste of my own money since even a court order couldn't help him learn how to be an adult. Plus, I don't want to sever any possible connections I have with his parents, who often help me keep an eye on my daughter on the weekends, even though they strongly dislike me. Because focusing on every single one of my mothering fails and the fact that I go to therapy is easier than admitting that their son has a mental disorder that he refuses to seek help for. For the last couple of years, my day goes like this. I wake up and take care of her and find someone to watch her while I go to my part-time job. At night, I put her to bed and drink a giant cup of coffee and then work on my own business from about 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. until I can't keep my eyes open any longer. I'm constantly stressed about finances, always sleep deprived, have zero social life, even before quarantine, and moving way slower in my career than I'd like. I have high expectations for the way I treat her and I've never hit her and do my best to be as patient as possible, but that has a high emotional toll since she has enough energy to power Texas's power grid. It's a constant struggle to keep hustling every day because of the part of me that wants to give up on my own goals. But I also know that while that might be a relief in the short run, it would just lead to resentment for myself and for her. I'm driven to accomplish my own goals so I can show her it's possible too. But there's so much mom guilt for not being able to give her the best or constantly pay attention to her when I'm trying to finish off chores before she even goes to bed so I can focus on the business. I love her to death, but I can't help wondering how much further I would have been, how much happier and healthier and not tired I would have been if I had just gone with my first instinct and given her up for adoption. I also feel guilty wondering if her life would have been better with her two parents. I never would have chosen to be a single mother or for her to be raised by one. Dating is nearly impossible because if the single mom part doesn't scare them off, the fact that her dad is still part of our lives definitely does. Honestly, what takes up the most energy beyond working, cleaning, and taking care of her is the amount of self-awareness I have to continue functioning daily so I don't spiral into depression or alcoholism. I love her, but I'm embarrassed at where my life is. Single mom living paycheck to paycheck, no boyfriend, trying too hard to reach her dumb childhood dreams to have friends or a social life. I see other women my age with kids and great careers and supportive partners, and I have to constantly talk myself out of comparing myself to them or wondering what's wrong with me because that just leads to me feeling like I need a drink. Essentially, I feel like I'm trapped in a shadow of the life I wanted for myself and have degenerated into a fraction of the person I used to be. I've gained patience, have a lot more mercy and understanding for others in tough situations, and can plan ahead and navigate troubles on my own, but my trust in others has decayed. Since staying in touch with her dad and his parents mean I expect to be shamed and talked down to all the time. I will keep trying to control the things I can and let go of what I can't, but this certainly isn't the life I pictured for myself or my kid. Story 44. I knew deep down throughout my teens, 20s, and early 30s that I didn't want kids. My girlfriend and eventual wife seemed to be on board with this, but when we got into our 30s, she started to want them more and more. For context, I'm a very independent person and a massive introvert and love my own company. I still wasn't convinced, but she sold it to me as the next step in our relationship. I just never warmed up to the idea of being responsible for this other human and essentially being on call 24/7, 365 for the next 20 plus years. I told her about my concerns and she said, "It's normal to feel this way before you have them. That all changes when they come along." So, albeit begrudgingly, I agreed. In hindsight, I should have held out and spoken to a therapist about it before I committed to going through with it. It took a while to get pregnant, but eventually it happened. All throughout the pregnancy, I was nervous and apprehensive in equal measures, but she convinced me that this was absolutely normal. Daughter was born, and all my fears were confirmed. I just wasn't cut out for parenthood. I did all the jobs that were required, but simply couldn't convince myself that this was what I wanted. I figured it'd get better or easier, but it didn't. Our daughter was healthy but very needy. In her first 2 years, she never once slept through the night, and she rarely napped during the day. I was utterly exhausted, burned out, and ended up having a nervous breakdown. One day, I'd spent 2 hours trying to get her down for a nap. Eventually, she drifted off, so I put her down, and she woke up again straight away. It was at that point that I seriously considered putting a pillow over her face. At that point, I knew I had to do something before I ended up hurting her or myself. I didn't see any way this could get better, so I left. I had to, for the sake of my sanity. I talked it through with my now ex and we agreed that I'd support the child until she goes off to university or finishes college. But other than that, I'd have minimal contact just on birthdays and Christmas. This is an arrangement that suits both of us just fine. I now have my own place and my own independence back, and I'm 100% happier. I'm sure having kids is great for most people, but it just wasn't for me. Story 45. So, not really what Opie asked, but could provide some different perspectives. 1. I am an unwanted child. I was told I was an accident and never felt love from either parent. They played ping pong with me over whose house I stayed at, and I often felt unwanted. My mom was 17 when she had me, so she had done her own thing and went out partying, came home drunk, and I remember staying home on my own at a young age. My dad didn't care at all, and I was just a chore for him, and when he had to have me, you don't realize how much you need the love and affection growing up. I have a couple of personality disorders and many issues, even though I'm nearly 30 now. 2. I dated a girl at 22 who had a kid by accident, and I could see the pain inside her after she told me she'd be better off without him. I remember when she was studying and trying to get a better job, the kid just wanted to play and she snapped at him. Made me feel exactly as I did when I was young and had to leave the whole situation. 3. I recently dated a really great girl. Like, she's a worldie, fit, funny, talented, great personality. To be honest, I couldn't actually ask for more. Boy, when I say I was punching, she has a disabled 4-year-old boy with a brain tumor. He can't play alone, he can't talk, and if he falls over or knocks his head, it's extremely dangerous. Her previous relationship with the dad split up as it was a lot of stress on both of them taking care of him 24/7. It really takes its toll on her. After our first time sleeping together, she just broke down in tears. I loved both of them, but I can see what she means when she says it's too much work. He really does need round-the-clock care. However, it wasn't good for her mental health to keep saying how she can't cope with the kid or she'd be better off if she got rid of him or mine to keep hearing it, to be honest. Story 46. These are the worst answers for a 20K upvoted question I have seen. Less than 5% of people are actually answering the question. I actually have 3 kids, and it's tough. I had the first kid because I thought I could handle it. She has some mild special needs, ADHD, and very mildly autistic. I had the first kid because I thought I could handle it. She has some mild special needs, ADHD, and very mildly autistic. And after I had her, I realized I didn't want another because of how much work it was, and I didn't think I could do a good enough job. My wife wanted more though, and actually threatened to unalive herself if we didn't have another. She wasn't serious, but I gave in anyway. The third was an accident. I got a vasectomy after that. Honestly, it's like having a job you don't like, but you have to show up anyway for the paycheck. You may get really annoyed at your customers sometimes, but other times it's rewarding, being able to take care of them with a smile. I have to put them to bed every night and get up with them every morning, and I'm sick of it, and I never feel like I get enough sleep. I have tried to teach them to make themselves breakfast, but the 4-year-old still needs help. The house is pretty messy. I can clean one room at a time, but by the time I get to the next room, the first one is starting to fill with toys again. The pandemic has been rough as we have been keeping them home from school for a year now. Teaching them is tough when they seem to actively reject my help. I'm actively lobbying for just homeschooling the 6-year-old because he hates most of the online classes so much. It's less work to just teach him myself than to yell at him and deal with the tears and tantrums with forcing him to pay attention to his online class. He says it's too boring. I'm optimistic my answer will change once we can send them to day camp this summer. They are much more tolerable in small doses, and they are obviously lonely with barely being able to see any friends for a year. Outside observers like their teachers and therapists say we are doing a great job, so I don't know if this answer is exactly the spirit of the question. I try not to be mean to them. While I do drag them out of our bedroom and lock them out of it and yell and give them timeouts when they are bad, I never hit them. I always give them hugs and kisses and piggyback rides and play video games with them when I'm not overwhelmed with chores and work. I do love them. It's just really hard in a modern society where the parents are expected to get very little help from extended family or the government, and the pandemic made that 10 times worse. Story 47. Both of my parents are low-life addicts who decided to have 8 kids. Me being the youngest boy with 3 younger sisters, with a gap of 2 years between me and my closest older brother. They moved out at 18 before crap really hit the wall. Now I'm the youngest man in the family, and being the breadwinner of my situation, I take care of all my little sisters. I know it's not my responsibility, but going through CPS and foster care when my parents were tweaked out when I was younger kinda stole my youth. I grew up very fast at 14 to 16 when my older siblings moved on, and I was left to deal with all the problems my parents created. I would really like to move on, and I'm making great money and have a wonderful girlfriend I would like to move in with. Sadly, I can't take myself to leave my little sisters to the same environment I grew up in. So now I'm 19. Making six figures and getting ready to buy a 4-bedroom so my sisters have a safe haven when my parents inevitably give up on their situation per usual. Although I despise the victim mindset my parents have and wish I could have been a kid for longer and not get into so much trouble as a teenager because of home life problems, I feel wise beyond my age and am far more successful with the pressure of my sister's well-being resting on my shoulders. I used to be susceptible to giving up on myself, but the world flipped upside down when I realized they would deal with the same issues I always did if I left like my other siblings. I do love my parents. I hate the ignorance and victim mentality, but I attribute a lot of my own growth and success to the constant pressure of a dysfunctional household. Story 48. I said I never wanted kids. My girlfriend, who I love, got pregnant by accident and decided to keep it. I went through almost unbearable amounts of depression and anxiety from the moment I found out she was pregnant until the baby was about 6 months old. It was a true nightmare compared to everything else I've been through in life. My wife has always been rather chronically ill, and because of that, I did about 80% of the work for the first 6 months. We had also just moved across the country, and the pandemic hit the same month my daughter was born, so we really didn't have any help. To anyone reading this who is pregnant or planning on having kids, it takes more than just 2 people to care for an infant. You need help. Anyway, my kid just turned 1 a few weeks ago, and I'm feeling much better about the whole thing now. I moved back in with my parents, and having other people around to watch the baby is a huge help. My wife's illness is also getting better. The hardest part is over, and now I just get to enjoy my toddler. Yes, it's still hard work every day, but I'm just kind of used to it now, and the good is good enough now to outweigh the bad. Going through the trauma of an unwanted baby was really hard, and I felt a part of me die as it was happening. But now that I'm on the other side of the dark forest, I feel much stronger than before, and I do love my daughter despite thinking I never would. As I type this, she's growling at me, pretending she's a dog, and giving me the cutest, dorkiest smile, and I just can't imagine anything better than this warm feeling in my chest. Story 49. I've experienced this in so many different ways. I was the child my parents didn't want. My parents were divorced, rightly so, because my father was a raging alcoholic who cheated and was prone to violence. Despite being divorced, my mom got pregnant with me. Then my father went to prison for 4 years, after which they remarried because she has zero self-esteem, I guess. She was so depressed she could barely function when I was growing up. I became skilled at avoiding my father's verbal abuse, and I counted myself lucky he never hit me like he did my older siblings. I grew up with all kinds of issues with men, and now I seem to attract control freaks. Seriously, if you're a miserable a-hole, don't have children. I had an unplanned pregnancy when I was 23. I decided to keep the baby even though I was terrified. I think I just wanted to experience what real love was. I don't regret having him, but I wish I'd been older because of one of the big coping mechanisms that got me through childhood was learning to focus on myself and whatever I needed at any given time, which means I'm kinda selfish as an adult. I don't mean to be, it's just a pattern that I developed as a child. So because I didn't have a good example of healthy parenting from my own parents, I studied. I read every book and magazine article I could find about babies and parenting techniques because I was so scared that I wouldn't love my child. After the birth, I had postpartum depression that went untreated, and in hindsight, I think I got through those first years mostly on willpower. I lost a child. My second was planned, and it was everything I'd wanted. You know how you just get something without having to try? Well, that was my second child. We were just always in sync, and I was the mom I'd always wanted to be. Until, at 2, he was diagnosed with a rare cancer. I feel like I ran a 4-year marathon to try and keep him alive, and then I collapsed when we lost him. I retreated so far into myself that I didn't have room for anything else, even my oldest child. During that time, his father was letting his parents care for our oldest, and, well, they took a lot of liberties and essentially treated him as if he was their child. I regret that I didn't have the energy to stop that from happening. I had another surprise pregnancy, and I love my child. She's the buoy that keeps me from sinking into the darkness, but I feel like I'm not the parent she deserves. She's dramatic and high-strung, but also very talented and even pretty sweet on occasion. I'm older, so I have more patience, but I also have more emotional shrapnel than most, so bonding with her isn't as easy to sync up with as I had my second child. It's been work. It's still work. I love her, I do. But that love is also swimming around with all the grief and regret, and I feel like I'm just treading water most days. That's not what I wanted for myself, and it's not what I want for my children. Story 50. This is my husband. We have been together for almost 9 years, and I have 4 children from my first marriage. When I found out I was pregnant, the expectation was that I'd get rid of it, but I just couldn't do that, so it ruined our marriage. He views it as a massive betrayal and resents me for it and resents all of the kids. He takes no joy in parenting, and he hates all of us for taking away his free time. Our daughter is 1, and she loves her daddy, but I worry that she will instinctively know that he never wanted her. All I can think about is how I ruined his life. He should have never gotten involved with a single mother in the first place, and I wish I could take it all back. I love him so much. My kids love him, but he no longer loves us. Every day is heartbreaking. We only see him a few days every other week because of his work schedule. We live apart already. He used to tell me I was beautiful. He used to leave little notes for me and things like that. He used to set aside time to play with the kids and think up of things for them. Now he can barely stand to look at me. He gives me the silent treatment and withholds affection. My love language is touch. The thought of being intimate with me disgusts him. He insinuates that I'm a bad mother anytime he's the one who has to do anything for the kids. He won't divorce me. His family would be ashamed of him if they knew that he resents being a father, so he just keeps pushing me farther and farther away. He can't find happiness in anything and treats the kids like an inconvenience. They know. The older ones, they know he doesn't like them, but they love him and they try so hard to get affection from him. They always ask me when he's coming next, and I'm dreading the day I will have to tell him he's not coming anymore. I love my kids so much. I love our precious daughter, and I wouldn't trade her for anything. But it's such a complex thing that I can love her this much and regret her so much. I hate myself for loving him. I should have let him go a long time. My heart is broken, and it's the greatest regret of my life. He wants nothing more than to be rid of us, and I've ruined his life, and he will never forgive me. Story 51. I was the unwanted kid. I was the technically sound product of a meant-to-be short fling between my mom and dad. My mom wanted to get rid of me, but my dad convinced her not to, claiming that since she got pregnant again after the first one, it's clearly meant to be. And my traditional grandparents pressured her to marry him because out of all of her boyfriends at the time, he was the most stable one. I think at first she just tried to make the best of the situation, treat me like a doll or something. I used to get ignored a lot. She'd sit in front of a computer all day looking at dream homes or inspiration. Even simple things like just asking her to make me something to eat was a hassle. Usually would take hours until she'd budge. By the time she would, she'd complain I'm too demanding. I learned basic things like getting food and drinks for myself at home pretty young. I'd get sent to fetch things from the supermarket at 10 p.m. at night at 8 years old. Only way I got money or anything I wanted was if it was for birthday or Christmas, and in terms of just general pocket money, I had to go to the shops and recycle all the cans and bottles we accumulated over the week. The only time she'd really pay attention to me was when she'd buy me cute girly clothes, which I hated, so she could dress me up or fix my hair or put makeup on me for a school photo day. For birthdays, she loved doing all the planning and cute girly decorating but hated the actual parties. But once I started getting a little older and didn't want to be dressed up, just wanted to dress normally, I got ignored more and we started fighting a lot more. When I was 10, my brother was born, and it's been night and day different since. My parents divorced shortly after he was born, and my mom, my brother, and I moved to Australia. Despite working a bunch, she'd make time for him after work and spend time with him. I was lucky to get a conversation out of her that wasn't a demand to do chores. She pays attention to what he likes and what he would enjoy. I still have to remind her constantly that I won't be into the same things she liked when she was younger. She's super picky about what kind of schools my brother will go to when we first arrived here. She just put me in the same school as all my cousins were at, and I hated it. Then for high school, she just sent me to the closest one because it was easier. My mom was picky about which primary school my brother would go to. She almost completely ready to send him to a new one when my brother mentioned he was getting bullied when he was younger. And she's considering sending him to a private school for high school. I had to fight and argue to even get basic school necessities and requirements when I was in school. Yesterday, we went full-on shopping for my brother's school camp that's coming up, whilst I'd have to pay for my own school excursions. She buys him a ton of stuff at a whim, and for birthdays and Christmas he has no problem asking for expensive gifts like consoles. Meanwhile, the most expensive birthday gift I ever got was a small drawing tablet. like $80 at the time. When I was 14, after months of begging and her boyfriend at the time calling her out for her very apparent favoritism to my brother. She was just planning to get me a cheap handbag, which her boyfriend knew then I definitely wouldn't use. I don't blame my brother at all, of course. He and I are super close. And now that I'm an adult, my mom and I's relationship is better. But whenever anyone asks about us, I am honest in saying our relationship works best when she treats me like a roommate or friend. I've never really seen her as a mother. I heard growing up too from grandparents and relatives alike that my parents never should have been parents, since they clearly didn't want me. Seeing all these comments from others honestly makes me feel a little reassured in my decision to not have kids unless I'm 100% certain that I want them with the right partner. Unwanted kids can tell if they're unwanted. I'd much rather not have kids than just having them because I feel like I have to. Story 52. I want to start this off by saying that I never felt that children were for me. I just don't have the disposition or patience. Not even using a throwaway. So I have a child that I didn't want with a woman who did, along with wanting me, who I'd gone on a handful of dates with. We didn't marry. I hardly knew her, and to call our relationship acrimonious would be kind. There's child support and custody issues. It's been stressful, and there's lots of PTSD and negative association with the baby. He's 2 years old next month, and actually is in my living room playing with toys in his last hour of our bi-weekly visitation weekends. I didn't want him. I don't want him, to be honest. But none of that is his fault, and so I do my duty and am responsible and take him. Most of the time the visits are fun, and once in a while they're really stressful. When I have him, it's a nice enough time, but when he's not around at all, I'm thinking about is that every other weekend is a weekend of mine lost. I often think about moving across the country and being a FaceTime dad. I'm already contributing 100% of his financial support. Mom's unemployed, quit her job to live off the child support, but he really does need me around. Mom's already in trouble with CPS, that's a story I won't go into, and is going through the motions to regain her half of the custody. In the meantime, he lives with his maternal grandma. So what is it like? It feels like a burden. It's energy going out that doesn't replenish. There's less reward, I imagine, than enjoying time with a child you wanted. I show him as good as a time as I can. We went to the aquarium today, and that was a hit. Now he loves Finding Nemo. But all I'm doing secretly is counting down the time till 6 p.m. on Sunday. My family knows this, my girlfriend knows this, and sometimes I wonder if I'm being responsible out of fear of their own judgment. I just keep reminding myself that he's an innocent party in this situation and it's not his fault. So I try to do my best even if I don't want to. That's what responsibility means after all, right? Finally, I want to say he's a good-natured and fun little kid, all things said. I don't know if that was a good answer to the question, but it's as honest as I can be. Too long didn't read. It sucks, but what are you going to do? Story 53. I was unplanned. Now I'm almost 51. I can reflect back to my past and identify how my mother expressed her frustrations with me as far as my earliest memory to present. She never wanted a third child. Not sure what came first, the chicken or the egg type of scenario. Either I was a black sheep naturally or I was subconsciously reacting to her treatment of me. Either way, I remain the black sheep of the family in spite of my above-average achievements. Now she is 77 and had a fall down the stairs late January 2021, breaking her neck, and now she is quadriplegic. There is no denying her preference to my older siblings over me. I'm fine with that. I left town at age 30 and never considered moving back. Things have been less stressful with her and me while we're apart. Things always come up when we're together. Don't get me wrong, she was fair with most things between my siblings and I. She really has been a good mother. I wonder how I would have turned out had I not been an accidental pregnancy, had I experienced the great mother my older siblings got. Here it is, the end of her life, nearing in a most obvious way. She has a couple years left at best, and I don't feel sad like normal people would. Like my brother and sister who are devastated. I just really hope she doesn't pass anywhere near the date of my son's birth and the date of his death. I don't want her to overshadow a loss that meant much more to me than the loss of her will be. I love her, I know she loves me, but it's pretty clear there's an equal level of hate. Last thought, if you are an unexpected parent, keep in mind the subtleties you aren't even aware of that confuse the child. That confusion turns into behaviors that may or may not be good. The parent's inner conflict destroys the parent as well. There's gotta be a better way. Story 55. I got my girlfriend in the summer after my senior year of high school. My girlfriend was a junior. We decided to keep the baby and I changed my plans to attend a university 4 hours away and instead went to a community college 9 miles away. My daughter was born during the finals of my freshman year and had colic. She screamed for like 3 weeks, and I have never been more sleep deprived. I was able to do pretty good on my finals, though. I was lucky because I had a college fund from my parents and I got a full scholarship. We broke up when our daughter was a month old. We just traded off having the baby every other day, and we bought diapers for us to use individually and split costs on clothes and doctor visits and pictures. After I finished community college, I enrolled at the private college in my hometown. It was very expensive, but my dad worked there and got an 82% off tuition. I also got a $1,000 a semester scholarship. That covered my tuition. I also worked 20 hours a week and had my college fund to pay for my living expenses. I graduated from that college. It took me an extra semester and my college fund had run out. My last semester was student teaching and I decided to work another job so I could focus on my teaching. I got $11,000 in student loans to cover my tuition and living expenses. When I graduated, I got a job at a cellular phone store. This was 1997, which ended up being pretty good money. We went to court to work out an official custody deal in which her mother got residential custody, and I had my daughter every Wednesday until 9 p.m. and every other weekend and on rotating holidays. I had her more in the summer as well. Her mom was with the same guy from since we broke up, and they lived together and eventually got married and had 2 more kids. I had many relationships and even lived with a few women, but did not get married until I was 39 and my daughter was 21. She actually got married before I did. I never had any other kids. I got a job at the community college I went to as an academic advisor. I paid $250 in child support. This was in 1997 until 2007. When my daughter was 12, her mom and stepdad got a divorce. My daughter and her mom started to butt heads and were not getting along at all. She asked if she could live with me. I gave up my 1-bedroom apartment and rented a 2-bedroom house, and my daughter, now 14, moved in with me. I gave her a cellular phone and told her she had better answer it whenever I called. She was pretty independent and got herself up for school, and her mom would give her a ride to school the first 2 years. She would also go eat dinner at her mom's every night as she only lived 5 blocks away. When my daughter was 16, I bought her a used car and she became even more independent. Her senior year, I met the woman who became my wife. My daughter moved out as soon as she graduated and got a job 45 miles away in the nearest big city. I got married 2 years later. I am divorced now. My daughter is 27 and thriving. She is still single and lives alone, but she has a good job and she wants to get married and have kids. I never wanted to have kids and I certainly did not want to have her, but now I am, of course, very happy with how things turned out. She is my only child and I am 46 and have a vasectomy, so I won't be having any more. We talk on the phone once a week and I see her once a month or so. Her stepdad was with her mom since she was 3 months old, so she considered both of us her dad. Her stepdad died of cancer 5 years ago. She misses him and was probably closer to him than she was to me, but we are close enough that we can talk about anything. We are only 18 years apart in age and we like a lot of the same things. Star Wars, superhero movies, good restaurants, some of the same music. We also will watch the same shows on Netflix and Amazon Prime. I do think about what my life might have been if we did not have her. I would have gone to the university and had the same major. I think I would have stayed in the area around the university to work my career in teaching. I may have eventually looked for work even farther away in another state with a bigger city. I think I would have gotten married a lot younger. I do not know if I would have kids or not. I always said if I met the woman that wanted kids, I would have one. But ideally, I would have met a woman who did not want kids. Instead, I never left my hometown. I dated and even lived with a few women, but did not get married until after my daughter had been gone for 3 years. I now live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment with a cat, who I love very much, but I do fantasize about the life I could have had if I didn't become a father at 18. Story 56. This will probably get buried, but I can only speak as a kid who wasn't wanted and knew it. I have so much sympathy for all of the parents here who have kids and have resorted to fake it till you make it. You have no idea how much better that is for the child, and as someone who I know couldn't do the same for my own kids, hence why I don't have any. I have so much respect for all of you. I was born to a mentally ill mother who never wanted kids. She's a narcissist, sociopath, bipolar, and Lord only knows what else is going on in that messed up drug-induced brain of hers. She told my biological father that she had a miscarriage because they'd both cheated on each other, and even after she, actively against my consent, told my dad that I was, in fact, alive and living with her brother, who was my legal guardian because she gave up parental rights, when I was 17 so that they could surprise me for my 18th birthday, I couldn't bring myself to want anything to do with him. I was far too damaged having grown up with my mom's abuse, not to mention that of the men she brought into our lives, and I was healing. I couldn't try to build a connection with a stranger I never wanted to meet. He tried, but it was obvious we weren't family, and with everything else going on, I ended up blocking all communication with him. Years later, once my mom was out of the picture, I reconnected and apologized. I explained that I wasn't ready. He explained that part of the deal in meeting me was a paternity test. He seemed genuinely apologetic that he had to tell me directly, and I had no issue in taking one. Results came back. He's my dad, but he doesn't know me and I don't know him. I'm 29 now and can honestly say I have a way better connection with him than I do with most of my mom's family. He's never once told me he loves me, but he's there. Even when I'm absent, he'll message me at least once every other week to ask how things are going and when I'm available to chat next. We talk about surface-level issues like current events or politics. Thank God we share political views. His divorce, how things are going with the siblings I don't have a connection with. When his mom died, he explained to me that she didn't know about me, that none of his family does, and he seemed genuinely remorseful in that. I told him I don't mind. I've had too many fake relationships in my life, and if I'm honest, I don't really care about meeting his family. It was one of the most honest and raw conversations I've ever had, and it was so refreshing. We don't pretend our relationship is something it's not. He's my dad, I'm his daughter, and that's the end of it. We don't pretend to have a connection that doesn't exist. Maybe it will over time, but I'm fine with what it is because at least it's real. To all the parents that are just doing their best being there, I really, truly commend you. It's okay to not have that connection. It's okay to admit that you don't, but the important part is that you're present and you're trying. Being there is the absolute best thing you can do for your kid, regardless of connection. I grew up with the fake love of a parent who wouldn't show up when it mattered. Now I have a parent who doesn't love me but shows up. I so much prefer the latter. Keep doing your best. Keep being there. I'm rooting for you. Story 55. I wanted children. I feel fortunate in that I waited until I was emotionally ready to have children. In particular, I wanted a son. My son is also autistic. I don't hide it. But us parents will never say we want an autistic child. We don't ask for the meltdowns. We don't ask to have therapists be our main social circle or the special ed teachers. We don't ask for the educational struggles because our children's brains are wired differently. We don't ask for our IEPs and parent-teacher conferences because the teacher finally notices how special our child is. We don't ask for having one-on-one support our child through almost every task because they need to be explicitly taught how to do it. And even minor, you should have picked up on it tasks. I definitely didn't ask to be a helicopter parent, not because we are the only qualified person who can raise our child, but because not hovering will inevitably lead to something going wrong somewhere else. We don't ask for the very real possibility that our child will have a lifelong financial and social support, or that a group home is a very real option in order for them to live on their own. For my son, he may need a full-time life coach just to become successful as an adult. At times, I feel fortunate. My child is high-functioning, which means that in theory he could live a somewhat normal life. However, I think he will always need to live with someone, not just for financial support, but for getting through life support. I've learned to take joy in very simple tasks. Attending a virtual class, doing an assignment, letting him figure out fair in a reasonable way, having him help with chores without him pitching a fit because I disturbed his routine, that he remembered his hygiene routine without prompting, that he remembered to change his clothes regularly, and so many other tasks that those with normal children would never have to entertain the thought of experiencing. Raising an autistic child is something that I never wanted, planned for, or asked God for. At times I wonder as a single woman, who in the heck would want to join me in my craziness? I feel envious of those whose children excel academically or in the sports department. Yes, I feel blessed that I didn't get a kid who loves sports or is active in various clubs, so therefore I'm not a soccer mom. I secretly look down on people who aren't tied to raising children, and I wish I could be one of them someday. Single dads who choose not to be an active part in their children's lives especially. Story 56. Throwaway account here. Not that I think people who know me would find this, but I'd rather be safe than sorry. And I'm sorry, this is a long one. Please feel free to ignore it. But it's good to vent this out to people who may understand the crap that a father tricked into having a child goes through. I was a 16-year-old boy who ended up having a drunken fling with a long-term friend who I knew had a thing for me. Despite being really drunk, I made a point of saying no initially because I didn't have any protection on me. After a lot of reassurance from her that we were safe because she was on the pill, we hooked up. Cue, a short while later, I was told she was pregnant. I was crushed. I was a kid with my whole life ahead of me, and had just been told that I was about to be a father with someone who I didn't want to be with, let alone have a child with. But despite my heartache, I told Sarah, obviously not her real name, that I would make sure that I would be there for our kid no matter what, and that somehow everything would be okay. After a few weeks of me insisting that I wasn't going to be with Sarah as a partner and that we'd have to co-parent separately, she turned nasty. I started hearing words that she was telling everyone that I had promised to be with her forever and had suddenly got cold feet because she was pregnant, that I had taken advantage of her when she was drunk and her guard was down, when in fact quite the opposite was true, and that I'd told her I wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. All lies, but at the time and in such a small community, nobody believed the young soon-to-be father when it came to the truth surrounding the baby. Sarah became more hostile as time went by, and I continued to affirm that we wouldn't be together. I didn't love her, and I didn't want to be with her as a couple, but I'd be there for the little one. This only made Sarah angrier, and the rumors grew worse. But it wasn't until Sarah's best friend came to my door shortly after that the crap really hit the fan. Her best friend knocked on my door late at night and stood there crying, telling me that she thought it was only fair that I knew what Sarah had done. She told me that Sarah had planned all along to fall pregnant as she really wanted a kid, and since she had a soft spot for me, it was her mission to get me to impregnate her. When she spotted me drunk walking home past her house one night, she took her chance, offered me inside for a coffee, and then as things progressed, deliberately lied about being on the pill, knowing that this was her best chance of falling pregnant and having me be in her life. I was destroyed. I'd called Sarah a friend since we were young kids, and she deliberately lied to me to fall pregnant. I didn't sleep that night, spending most of the time crying and hating myself for being so stupid. Then, the next morning, I went to Sarah's house to confront her. We ended up in a shouting match, with her finally admitting that she had lied. And it wasn't like she had done anything wrong either, because at the end of the day, it would be her baby and I wouldn't be allowed any access to it. I called her every horrible, degrading name I could think of as I stood outside her house weeping. She told me I would never get access to the kid and slammed the door in my face. Months after the little girl was born, I wasn't allowed any access. I had no help from anyone I spoke to, and the only time I got to see her was when Sarah's mother would take my daughter out for a walk and would secretly come to see me. She knew what her daughter had done and didn't condone it at all, and defended me to anyone who she heard miscalling me for being an absent father. She was an amazing woman, but died shortly after my daughter's first birthday, losing me my only line of access. I fell into a crippling depression. My name was mud around the town thanks to Sarah's lies about me, and being the father everyone naturally believed that I was, the deadbeat, and Sarah could of course do no wrong. I hid away from the world, barely ever leaving the house as I couldn't stand the stares and questioning looks. Thank God there was no social media back then, as I can only imagine the crap storm of gossip I would have faced. After a while of bottling things up and not being able to talk to anyone about what I was going through, I started to have wanting to self-unalive thoughts. I had no life left to live. Everyone thought I was a good-for-nothing father who had abandoned his kid, and I couldn't see a future for myself that didn't involve being horribly depressed all the time. I came close to ending things, but thankfully I held back. I was too scared to do it. As my daughter grew older, I only caught glimpses of her now and again in passing, with Sarah still insistent that I wasn't allowed any access. I was now working a very low-paid job in security and was giving the majority of my pay to Sarah to help support my kid. Sarah kept demanding more and more cash from me, with always the slight promise that if I supported her more, I'd get access and my daughter would get to know who I was. Eventually, it came to a point where I was living in a rented bedset with no furniture and no heating, eating beans on toast every meal because the majority of my money was going to Sarah. Yet she still demanded more. When I said I couldn't, she turned to the child support agency to see if they could force more money out of me. The CSA assessed me and set my payments at a far lower level than I had been paying already to Sarah directly. This drove her crazy as she demanded that I make up the shortfall or I would never get access. By this point, my daughter was now 7 years old. I'd never had official access, and I realized that Sarah was never going to change her stance if I kept playing along. So I told her that unless I got access, she would only ever get the mandated amount from the CSA. After some back and forth arguing, I finally had access, but limited at best. My daughter finally got to meet her dad properly, but we had no bond there to build from. She never really warmed to me despite coming to stay with me for holidays here and there, and as she grew older, she only got in touch if she was looking for money. She's in her late 20s now, and I rarely ever hear from her, and as much as it pains me, I understand. I wasn't there for her as a girl, and she has grown up not really knowing much about me because of that. I understand it's all hard for her, and I've never told her what her mother had done to me, as it's not my place to miscall a parent. But deep down, I wish we had that bond as she grew up. And her mother? There's not a day that goes past that I don't wish the absolute worst upon her. My hate for that woman is what fueled me through a lot of my darkest times, and I just wish that I could expose her evil publicly to the world without everyone assuming I was just a bitter, wayward father trying to pass the buck. Again, I'm sorry for this being a long tale. It's been pretty cathartic sitting here and writing this all down. And if you've made it this far through, thank you for reading. Story 57. I never wanted either of my children. I married young, at 15, because I was groomed and seduced by an older man, 25. I was promised I could finish school, go to college, and he would take care of me. My family was pretty neglectful and absent, so I thought my life would be better with him. Fast forward 1 year after marriage, and it turned out he was abusive. Huge surprise, right? He kept me locked at home and took away my birth control. I eventually became pregnant, but was not ready nor wanting to be a parent. I fell into depression. I gave birth to a son in February 9 months later. Fast forward 2 months, and he was finally agreeing to me having a part-time job because of finances. I worked there for 2 months, and then one evening was essayed by a coworker when we closed up together. I didn't tell my husband because he would have blamed me and beaten me, so I hoped for the best. Turns out the best didn't happen, and I became pregnant. I now was in full depression and suffered anxiety and PTSD. My second pregnancy gave me another son in January. I forgot to mention that the father's family sued me for custody during my pregnancy, which meant my husband eventually found out anyway and accused me of cheating because I hadn't told him what had happened. I divorced 4 years into the marriage, at the ripe old age of 19. Went to live on my own in a studio with my sons. So neither of my children were wanted, and I couldn't bring myself to enjoy them. Aside from my mental problems, I felt guilt because I didn't seem to have that maternal feelings everyone talks about. Everything required felt like a chore and a burdensome reminder of the bad choices I had made and the hideous men I had encountered. My oldest son, we'll call Drew, turned out to have severe mental issues and type 1 diabetes. My youngest, Eric, is severely autistic. My life turned into automatic movements, providing care for both sons, battling their issues, battling my own issues, and fighting my ex. Did I mention he was also a horrible co-parent? We all made it through the years, going through the motions. I did everything required of me and did my best to provide and give them a supportive and happy childhood, something I had been denied from my own parents and from getting married early. My sons are adults now, 32 and 30, and I have a grandson. Drew and I had a falling out in his 20s when he robbed his grandparents. I do not enjoy his company, and he is insufferable and basically a repeat of his father. Eric is pretty independent, but lives with me and may do so for life. I have some feelings for him, but it is more on the level of caretaking than endearment. I've worked with a therapist for 16 years, and I do my best to get those feelings, but they just don't come. I just never wanted children, and then to have 2 children dumped into my life against my will made it even worse. To answer the original question, it is soul-sucking and heartbreaking for me to have had children I didn't want. I and my children were robbed of feelings that seem like they should come natural to willing parents. I felt and feel obligated to perform and provide, but beyond that, it has never brought me joy. I don't get excited to see them after I've been away, nor do I long to spend time with them. Eric and I have developed a decent relationship and he thrives in my care, but again, it feels like an obligation. I wouldn't recommend having children if you feel reluctant, and I don't mean scared or unprepared, I mean truly reluctant, with no desire to have a little shadow and a lifelong responsibility. Seek therapy and make yourself whole before you birth a human into this world, or maybe decide if children are even for you. Story 58. I know I haven't been the best parent. I'm certain I had PPD after almost 6 months of my son being born. It's been difficult trying to essentially create the same feeling that I used to have when he was first born. I get more frustrated easily. I want to scream. What would that solve? He's only 3. I don't so much regret having him, I regret having my husband as the father. My husband promised himself that he wanted to be a better father than his biological and non-ones have been. In some ways, he has fulfilled that promise. He hasn't left the family. He has a full-time job. He hasn't abused our son. On the other hand, he avoids almost any and all activities involving our son. He rarely wakes up on the weekends to make and feed him breakfast. He won't consider taking him to the park, do arts and crafts, teaching time, or play with his toys. Trying to get him involved in his bedtime routine is like brushing his teeth. What does he end up doing? Playing video games and or watching shows, usually all day on the weekends. I've confronted him ever since I started noticing close to his first birthday. He always blamed someone or something. You're a stay-at-home mom, so he won't like me as he clings to you. I was deployed after he was born, so I wasn't able to imprint on him, and my schedule is too busy. And the worst, he's exactly like You. He probably regrets having him, or maybe like me, he regrets having him with me. Either way, it aches because I've seen how amazing he's been with other people's kids. He very much had the potential, which I felt comfortable saying yes to becoming a mother in the first place. It's changed so much. Story 59. It's unbearable and it sucks the life right out of you. 2/3 of mine I seriously could live without. And that pains me to say. No hate, please. I'm just answering honestly. My kids are 5.5, 4, and 3. My 5-year-old is amazing, lovely kid, and rarely gives me grief. My 2 boys, however, make me cry and hate my life every day. I'm 99% sure Mr. 3 is some kind of product of the devil himself. Whenever I'm alone with my daughter, no, this isn't a gender thing, it just worked out that she's the good kid, I think and long for all the nice things her and I could do together, but can't because of her brothers. I often think about running away, but guilt eats me alive. The boys would be fine, they have an amazing father, but my daughter wouldn't be. So I sit here day in and day out doing what I have to do to keep them alive and try not to ruin them emotionally or mentally. I hope and pray, and I'm not even religious, lol, that the 3-year-old will grow out of it, but I know I'm fooling myself because he came out screaming and hasn't stopped since. Worst thing is, I begged and pleaded and made promises I couldn't keep to have them all. My now ex-husband didn't want the second or especially the third. My second was a very difficult baby and I kept saying the universe could never be so cruel as to give us another like T. Boy, was I wrong. It's been 1,000 times worse than T. I try every day to make them feel loved and go through the motions of spending time with them, cuddling them and fixing their ouchies, but every day I wish I could go back and not have them. Story 60. I never wanted kids. Never liked them. I thought it would be heck. Well, it turns out my girlfriend doesn't know how to take her dang birth control and she got pregnant. Even though she said she'd get rid of it, if that ever happened, she couldn't go through with it. Might have been intentional, she was an addict at the time, but clean now. We had a special needs kid, autism. It was really bad at first, really, really bad. Most days I wished I didn't have to come home from work. He would bite and spit and scratch and destroy things and just act like a hellion all the time. He was in early intervention, so they knew he was delayed a bit, but no one told us what to actually do. He had therapists that would come to the apartment and do stuff with him, but didn't actually do anything, and no one had any gosh dang advice other than count to 3 and put him in timeout. When I put him in timeout, he'd just have a huge meltdown. He broke a plasma TV, windows, countless mini blinds. I would regularly have to restrain him to keep him from hurting us or himself. It got so bad that we started considering if we could even keep him or if we had to put him in a group home or for adoption or something. It was so out of control, we were so miserable. He was ruining our lives. Our relationship was really, really strained. We were depressed. I was wanting to self-unalive. I just wanted it to end. He got expelled from kindergarten. The public school couldn't handle him. He was destroying the classroom, hitting kids. I remember the final time I picked him up from there and he was rolling in the hallway with a box of Legos or crayons or something and it was tossed all over the hallway. They put him in a private school for mentally ill kids. We started calling the local mental health crisis line when he was like 8 years old. After about the 3rd time, they finally took it seriously and referred us to a psychologist for testing. After a few appointments, they determined he had autism and ADHD. He went into a partial hospitalization program. Instead of being committed, he went for like 7 hours a day for 2 weeks or something. Didn't really accomplish anything though. He got into therapy and started getting medication and things started getting a little better. Then they decided when he was like 11 that he was doing well enough that he shouldn't be in that private school anymore. We disagreed, but they probably just didn't want to pay for it anymore and sent him back to the public school. It was a disaster. He hated the change and started saying he wanted to unalive himself, unalive other people. He didn't mean it, but the school had to take it seriously, so they started putting him in a padded timeout room. Yeah, bet you didn't know school had those. I had to repeatedly leave work to go and get him from school. Almost lost my job. After a couple years of that crap, he stopped and made more progress. He's still disruptive in class and still sped, still behind, but he's 13 now and nearly a normal kid. I'll never let him know what a burden he was or that he was unwanted. We do the best we can parenting him and trying to be a normal family.